no cards and do a 30-second speech. So it's just like your half.
That's what you did.
I was not.
Oh yeah,
I was fucking. Because the app was like.
that is
We
something
should-
you would do. If I know anyone who would do that, though, you'd stand up. You'd be like, it's a double turn. I'll hedge my bet.
That's like capitalism is evil. Thus, we should give.
Oh, Kincaid Jarka?
Yeah, it was like
It was like, we should move
help
people to jobs because capitalism is evil.
Yes, it didn't make any sense.
It's so bad.
It is
It
evil.
is
We
so
should give people
bad.
buses if and only if they use them to go to work. That sounds capitalist. And you're critiquing.
It's amazing how long that app was.
I know. And the guys are refused to go to the staff. They just keep getting vehicles. Just every night. They're like, you
That's
can't be
hysterical.
buses.
Oh my god, that's too funny. That's your people? I ain't so anything.
Look at the app, those buses.
That's about infrastructure, their transportation. How much about
Never came worse than I could. You know, later, I'm not gonna get that.
That's fair.
Okay.
Because I wonder if we read one of our cards. I what's the list that we only just put paper dots.
That's my like main thing. It's like that. I'll redo it every card you
Like, Viva was the exact opposite. I feel like so Viva was just like I got everything. Okay.
Well, then it would just be like, man, I jumped you half of the package on Splash. I was like, why? He was like, I want you to read all of it.
What?
He was like, they read an Iran Impact.
Can you read
And he was just like, can you read 25 Iran Defense?
And
I
then
was
he
like,
sends all of it.
I was like, no. And he was like, okay, just go to the DA, go to the other arguments, and just go read straight down. I was like, okay, then, dude. That's what
never
you
said
want.
anything without mentioning it.
And then dealing with
Blue.
Is what I need for later. There. That is. Okay. Okay, I read part code of this card like 25 times to make it better, and every time I do that,
You know, it's kind of funny stuff.
Do you want to do your writing? Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your email?
BD ELO 77 at Gmail.
BDELO. Sounds
I think that's hysterical.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was okay.
I like it.
Okay, the secret is I bought them before UMKC and then decided that we would look like douches if we put them on, but then eventually just decided, you know what,
Okay.
they're too cool.
I like it. Helps a lot. What's the sticker in the middle of your computer? 'Cause it looks like Chinese characters.
It is. It's the character she, which means
Yeah.
happiness.
I did Chinese.
I'm a Chinese minor. It's so hard.
I was gonna be a Chinese minor and I was like, it's too fucking hard. It's like doing 25 hours of Chinese over the weekend. Like, I can't. I have other things in my life.
And the thing is, that's on Tuesday.
Oh wow. That's all of your space. Not really. It's just like the whole the network of technology. Like wow. Jimmy Jones is my face. I don't know. I should. Who does usually get them?
all good.
As soon as I pull it up.
Is anyone not ready?
Contention, what is the organ shortage in 1984? The U.S. Congress passed the National Organ Transplantation Act, created a waiting list for people in need of organs. Today, there are over 100,000 people on that waiting list registered for transplantation but waiting to die. Demand is increasing. Solutions are 2 people die at the end of this. Made the 7,007, 7,000 Americans are waiting for the kidney, more are waiting for the liver hearts, and lung bring the total to 90,000. No, waiting is 8 years and expected to double supplemental list size every 90 minutes. Our national organ policy closes off. A large supply that relies solely on altruism is not enough. If we want to increase the supply, we try to instead of expanding energy donor eligibility is not enough. We will fall short. We've accepted the markets for the expert and surrogate mothers. This system with the safeguard children approval to the status quo. They'll last thousands to die each year. Now, this is just the beginning. Population growth and current trend prove that death will apply with time and spirit at all. And 13 things may become worse. There are a variety of strong reasons to be very pessimistic about the future. It's not responsible to wait nor is impossible to forecast future conditions. The conditions that give rise to the renal failure or rising obesity leads to diabetes and hypertension. These will increase the demand for the transplantation, exacerbate the shortages, increasing the lifespans, increasing the organ shortages. Thus, society will see greater demand by 2050. The U.S. organ waiting list will lose to about 1,600,000 without the fundamental changes. Life loss will exceed 200,000 by 2050. These figures and the rest of the consequences of inaction or 500,000 people die on the waiting list, and the actual number may be far higher. The 10 of the current population increasing, and the shortages of longer waiting list, and the higher number of the patients that the future will look even worse. Now, legalization of the sales is the comparative best mechanism. Short-term and long-term effects that fear it all. And 13 is survey of economists found that 70% favor the legalization of the organ supply. The economists are correct to use the compensation is the single most useful policy response to the global shortage of the organ transplantation. We face a choice, and that choice will materially affect millions. The tools of economic analysis are useful. Introduction of the direct compensation will increase the organ supply and promote an expansion of the transplantation, diminish the use of dialysis, and use the large and ongoing safety in the prohibition bars. The people making voluntary arrangements to improve or save their lives. The death on the waiting list are an argument for the reform. Even with a relatively short time period selected, the introduction of the compensation with the donation will save the lives of the long term. The benefit becomes greater. It is difficult to think of any other policy change towards this. A strong, credible claim can be made. Now, other reforms should not be evaluated before the plan. The longer we wait, the worse we'll get. And incremental reforms are failing. That's that's spirit. All 13 the reforms have not been proposed. Despite the demonstrated effect, the shortages persist. The fundamental problem is not the reforms do not work. Rather, they improve matters. However, there is danger that the modest success with the modest proposal will delay the implementation of the reform that can actually eliminate the problem by entertaining more and more innovations within the current paradigm. We find ourselves even more willing to implement the further schemes that, whatever their merits are, unable to eliminate the death toll. Now, legalization is a better option than the status quo. A legalized system would incentivize sellers to be healthier and increase the quality, quantity, and access to organs while preventing the illegal market from thriving. That's San Diego and Block in Levins. But you need a kidney transplantation on the organ transplantation waiting list. You could sit and wait for a very long time. You undergo dialysis up until a week or by the day. You ever going to get a kidney is a question that no one has a definitive answer to. The thousands of Americans die each year while on the organ transplantation waiting list. The system that allows those who wither and wait and die under the current system, the regulated system in which the organs cannot be sold. The number of people dying on the waiting list is sobering. Every year, over 13,000 people die waiting on heart transplantation. Over 3,000 die waiting on kidney transplantation. The solution: repeal the NOTA and allow the market to work. The system is there are simply not enough organs to satisfy demand. The organ transplantation is expensive. By opening up the market, the business would start off at the lower price. If selling was allowed there, would be an increase in supply. The supply of organs would increase until the equilibrium. The price would then decrease. The companies would be forced to sell the organs for less because of these surplus. The competition would push prices down. The organs would be cheaper. The price of the surrogacy would also decrease the greater number of the organs would drive the production downwards. This is yet another reason the free market of transplantation would be more affordable. The companies would be buying the organs that could have a better option to pick. This would be a large number of people willing to sell. Not only would the quality of organs be on the market, but so would many more. Some of even higher quality than those used today. There would be an incentive to sale because of the gain. The quality of the organs could increase the total number of the organs, definitively increase the organ transplantation. Intermediaries would have more resources to choose from. The companies would offer more money than the quality of the organs. There would be legal remedies. Acquiring the organ from the unwilling could be solved using a tracking system to ensure the organ purchasing the companies were obtained of the organs of the willing individuals. The fines would serve as an incentive for the companies to double check the origin of the organ documentation. Every 8,000 lives have been lost on the waiting list on an annual basis. The current system is not maximizing the amount. It is not saving the maximum amount of lives. These deaths will continue until the U.S. decides to end the control and allow the enterprises to reduce the inefficiency. The correctness will no longer be allowed to result in needless deaths of tens of thousands of people. Now, the illegal market created in search for organs is an independent reason to vote affirmative. That's Taylor and no sex. In the current in a legal current markets, vendors and then use purchasers would enjoy the protection against the fraud. Were the purchasers failed to pay, that vendors would be able to take legal action. Since the legal remedies aren't available within a black market, they would be the subject to the fraud. There is more information available to the vendors to use. It would be advantageous for the brokers who would advise the information the kidney brokers would. So that would be more supplemented by third-party information. Consider how helpful that would be if there were about another medical procedure. Even those proposed opposed the legality of abortions would not now offer this argument for it is with the legal trade in abortion suffers from few of the abuses that coming in the black market for. The argument to be persuasive is preponderance to provide an account for how the legalization of a market would, and kidneys would simulate the black market were a market legalized, a person would only buy a black market kidney if the kidney were cheaper. The legalized were markets legalized, more people would be available. The persons would be willing to sell them. The increase in the supply would cause the price to drop. The kidneys will be traded in both legal and black markets on an individual to individual basis. If a market were were to be legalized, then most people would purchase them from the brokers would be not be individuals but government agencies. Second, the black marketeers could be eliminated by removing the regulations imposed upon the black market on the legal market. The black market and the human kidneys would not be stimulated by the legalization but by the regulation of such market. Possibility of the legal redress would deter the online facilities. The screening would be of higher quality of the purchasers expect to maximize the profit. No version of the anti-market argument can justification of a prohibition of home values human well-being one to support rather than oppose the legalization of a market and the human kidneys, and all objections to the affirmative required first deciding those on the list can die. All arguments against the market are based on fear but not evidence as full. In 07 to pay for kidneys, the kidney has the same meaning and worth regardless of whether it is paid for or considered human life, nor is paying for the kidneys is morally similar to selling a human being. There's no control over another human. There's no risk of harm to a human who is too young to consent. There's no selling out of the stolen compensation for an organ. We are no more pork bellies with the organ transplanted, whether for money or for free, than the transportation surgeon is a butcher. The anti-commodification claim may be a philosophical and spiritual axiom, a premise rather than a conclusion. My soul rebels against the controls that limit the supply of the transplantation organs and thus lead for people to die needlessly, and no risk of human abuse as a waiting period. And in-kind compensation solved its Humphrey in 1020. No one is talking about a privatized contract system, and no large lump sum cash donors. The surgeons, legal scholars, and economists and bioethicists in business system in which every needy patient, not just financially well can benefit a government entity or a design charity would offer the kind of reward because a third party provides a reward to all patients, not just financially secure, will benefit the imposing a waiting period of at least 6 months. They would ensure that the doctors didn't act impulsively and or given the fully informed consent, or the donors would be carefully screened and for the physical and emotional health as well has been done for all donors. Now the donor kidney would be distributed to the people on the waiting list according to their rule. Now in place, people who want to donate a kidney or a specific person would still be able to do so. All reward of the donors would be guaranteed on a follow-up medical care for the complications, which is now enshrined in law. Now the United States should legalize organ sales in the United States. Contention to its impact rating. Prefer the affirmative impacts to highly specific long-term disadvantages. Cognitive bias means you think their impact is better than it is. That's you asking no sex. The conjecture fallacy applies to the foregoing forecasts. According to probability theory, adding additional details must render the story less probable. Yet human psyche seems to follow the rule that adding an additional detail can make the story more plausible. Specific scenarios can later probability estimates as well as misdirect the investment into the impulse and details number of scenarios. People tend to overestimate the conjunctive probabilities, underestimate the disjunctive probabilities. People overestimate the probability that 7 events of 90% probability will occur. People underestimate the probability that 1 of 7 events of 10% probability will occur. Now, evaluating risk with a 1% doctrine makes life impossible. Everything can theoretically cause extinction and resolve extinction. That's Mescal and 9 Friedman's piece applies Shady's 1% doctrine to the environmental Armageddon. This doctrine is both intellectually incoherent and practically irrelevant. It cannot be applied consistently in a world with so many potential disasters: warming, asteroids, terrorists, nuclear weapons, pandemics. Each risk on the 1% doctrine would deserve all of our attention. We cannot just all of them simultaneously. I treat the unlikely to catastrophic event as somehow fundamentally different. We get into our hearts by coffee, even though there's some chance that we will be killed. We are constantly risking death. Any creature that adopted a precautionary principle would neither act nor not act, since it would nowhere discover perfect safety. Many movements exhibited precisely this combination of traits. The looming apocalypse with time just barely to take action. Now, evaluating the public health cost of the status quo organ policy is necessary for solvency. Some state level structure is inevitable, so the question is how to use it. That's Cecilio and Lenin 13. The conceptualizing of the organ coherent is a public health issue and a transaction problem is useful because it directs the analytical attention to both the structural and individual considerations in considering how society should allocate these scarce resources and acting the coalition seek to make the legislation and resulting in the institutional framework as durable as possible. And anarchist perspective suggests that absence of any state rule of such a system currently remains politically infeasible. The politics can be an important tool in designing the effective organ procurement system. The political institution is the form of both legal rule and nor play a critical role in procuring of the organs. Now, some suffering is probably inevitable, but we should stop the most extreme forms that we can. That's Atlantis. In 06, the suffering increases in number of long as the subject becomes evil. The suffering leaves the subject without resources, without consciousness. There is suffering in which the hope is no longer possible. The suffering is a rupture of the meaning. It suffocates the subject, and the source of the world. Suffering is absurdity. The justification of extreme suffering are inseparable from the unbearable pain. They seem to legitimize death and suffering. Medicine, freedom, and will is will endure the pain as the tyranny. This tyranny threatens the identity. The suffering destroys the capacity of human activity when it is severe and unjust.
Kristen, I think it's last person.
All right. Which piece of evidence do you have that quantifies the number of organs that are available to supply?
The Indio and block evidence, I think, substantiates that, and the 3 bearded gold cards are all like here. There are over the amount of people willing to sell.
It says that 3,000 people will die. Where does it say X amount of?
Well, the Indio and block evidence actually plays out a system. It says businesses would start up with lower prices. If selling was allowed, there would be an increase in supply. The supply of organs would increase until it hit equilibrium. The price would then decrease. The companies would be forced to sell for less.
That same
because
piece
of
of
the
evidence
surplus.
says, quote, the solution, repeal the NOTA. Does the act repeal the NOTA?
Yeah, the way we would legalize organ sales would probably be repealing the NOTA.
Okay. If we say that's not topical, does that mean you should lose?
We say organ sales should be legal. We say a way that happens is by repealing NOTA. You should win if you prove that we should not.
Why is an
legalize organ
illegal
sales.
market a quote unquote independent reason to vote act?
The evidence indicates it leads to wide-scale dehumanization by stealing of people's organs
Why is
without any
that
chance
bad?
of. Why is it bad to go around, take people's organs, kill them, and let them
What is
suffer and die?
dehumanization is my question.
Well, I think the evidence. You're right. The phrase dehumanization I use might not be correct. The evidence is more like they would take their
Well, why
organs
did you
without the
use that
ability.
phrase in the question then?
Why did I apologize for using the phrase if you think it's incorrect. It's not part of the one I see. It's just that this evidence is like we would take people's organs and leave them in a position where they would likely die and be unable to protect against fraud and other illegal
Tag
acts.
one of your cards. All objections to the affirmative require first deciding that those on the list can die. The card says, quote, the anti-commodification claim may be a philosophical spiritual axiom, a premise rather than a conclusion. Why is that a reason that commodification is good?
No, the argument is you must prove that that commodification is something that is inherently objectionable. To claim it commodifies so it is bad is wrong. The bullet card is like everything we do is inherently part of a system of commodification because any reason that you act is because you see some potential benefit. What is important is to figure out how to use that correctly. What's up?
Are all actions based on those sort of cost-benefit calculations?
All actions probably entail making some decision.
That doesn't answer my question.
Well, a decision-making model. Well, a decision-making model is like you decide what is beneficial and what the negative consequences of that are.
So yes, mescal evidence. Mescal evidence. It says the reason why 1% doctrine is bad is because the saturation of risk means, quote, since it would nowhere discover perfect safety. It's talking about a person. Why is striving for perfect safety a good thing?
It's not.
And what's the
This
impact
card
of
is-
mescal evidence?
The mescal evidence is just like the conception that we should seek on a 1% doctrine to eliminate all threats is ridiculous because it's impossible to do. It's a defensive argument against.
Okay. The Edo glass evidence says that suffering is a form of tyranny. Why?
It indicates it overwhelms a subject and makes it impossible for them to show.
What's a subject?
It overwhelms any being.
Well, I want to. What's a subject?
In the context of this card, it is being or person. It's not specific to anything more than that.
Okay, that's enough for your opportunity. Let me know when y'all have it up. Just the first page. Or actually, no, you can separate those. I'll go to the first page and then the second page. Is anyone not ready? Okay. Legalization of organ sales sustains neoliberal violence, the poor coerced into deconstructing and modifying their biological assemblage to allow for the wealthy to live indefinitely till right. And 12, the decision to sell organ amounts to economic conscription resulting from the heightened disparities of neoliberal globalization from market perspective, dogmatically ignore realities faced by sellers in need, face extraordinary threats to their health, their violence, and disease, short swords become complicit in suffering of the hidden population, asking for first world medical conditions, and separation of already unjust global relations, systemic organ not be addressed by peaceful solutions like organ sales, advocating for organ sales as a addition to a U.S. form of concern for the poor, arising from ulterior motive of increase in supply of organs for the first time, people motives to normalize the poor, turning their suffering into an opportunity. The quantification of suffering is suffering, but making it into a unit of equation for benefits and losses. This distributed paradigm must be itself a question before people can begin to care about the marginalized human subjects as the supply side and destroy the recipients and manipulated by scientific instance on the extension of life transformed and artificially inflated by consumer attitude towards medicine. These are conditions treatable, worthless, vulnerable, less to surrender their bodies so that we can have longer, more comfortable lives. And the capitalist regime based on consumption is predicated off the desire to prolong life indefinitely. That's the root cause of violence and worker Robinson. And 12, symbolic exchange for Robinson plays a higher role in the emergence of capitalism. Symbolic exchange replaced by equivalence and subtly serves the social problem in exchange of death of the other two natural returns. The same capitalism rests on the obsession of the abolition of death is bound to fail. The point of this roads of death more places in individualizes people by destroying their actual connections to others and split. Diverse exchanges across the categories we still exchange with the dead. We no longer have living relationships with objects. They're reduced to instrumental symbolic uses based on the equal and dismissive results in the state. Invented to take their place, Westerners invented that their world racist fantasies that their world involves the rest with the aspirational fantasies of deployment. We all go in the death of both the survival of the fundamental birth of power, social control, and ritual union. Living in the death of shrouding the death, cover over to the social progression of death, regarding to repress the socializational life. People are compelled to survive so long as it becomes useful. Death is made invisible, denied. Placed as in society, people no longer expect their own death becomes done until full discreet, the bureaucratic and brute over the human death of which the concentration gains the ultimate symbol of the civil now. Commands that we must only die while thousand people have killed, left to die in the process of the dead, and never treats them as having value. The capitalism becomes permissive, inclusive, and intolerant. The slave remains within the master's dialectic for life existence, is reproduction and domination, and the justification for organ sales is based on indefinite extension of reproductive, able-bodied life that views death as an ultimate evil, which is the underlying cause of the worst forms of capitalist violence, meander, and 6. Those feelings that feel the belief that the imperative to make organs available, the feelings of urgency and desperation make it difficult to think correctly about the assumptions driving the translates into well, so also might be experiencing a shortage of gas and the business of the shortage we could permit drilling or modify our desires in a way that we no longer think of a shortage than accepting certain limits on how we live. You only search for ways to procure organs to live practical alongside our desperation and impending death or tendency to see death as evil to be caught out, and we must have another equal vision of what it means for us to be human. Each of us shares in the limits of our finite condition. We are mortal, the receiving of an organ does not rescue the living for the dead, for the need to die, and only differs the dead with me will have to do their own dying. We should not deny existential anguish. We should not deny the each of their needs. We will find the place in the solution to refuse to acknowledge that would turn medicine into a crusade against that place by the shortage of cures for a deadly ailment. Their survival society is not threatened. There will always be an organ shortage. That's just the truth. The human condition. We turn on organ procurement into a crusade. We make that simply a problem to be solved rather than an event to be adjourned. We undermine wisdom and care. If we think of death as only a problem, which is imperative, we solve very deadly imperative to secure organs. We may be able to think again and reject the affirmative system of commodification. This rejection allows for radically passive politics to alter practices and consumption by forcing the system to commit self-sacrifice. BFO. And 11. Mountain radical thought is why in the process of subjectivization is energetic mobilization, social design, collectivism, expression, participation within the most conscious collective energy, finding out the desire which is given to the democracy, soul dynamic, the social sword, and black hole virtualization, the relentless simulacra, saturate the space of attention, imagination, advertising, is so minute. The energies from mobilization, exhaustion is the only way of escape. Nothing can avoid this symbolic obligation. The system must itself commit suicide, response to the challenge of death and suicide. So hostages are taken from whichever moral consideration fictions is ruled out. The hostages substitute the hostages death for the tears, hostages and tears. Therefore, after become confused in the same sacrificial life, no need for descriptive and sinking for unintended effects. Lessons become suicidal exhaustion and seen as the inability of the body to escape the vicious doesn't need the capitalism is prepared exhaustion. Become a blue-way civilization based on withdrawal of real expectations of life and consumption radicalism could begin an activism and of dogmas of passivity, radical passivity, threatening ethos of relentless productivity. The neoliberal politics is imposed. The work will finally display we have been working too much and outrageously too much in the last 30 years is only possible if we start from exhaustion. We instead create a side of withdrawal. The exchange between life and money could be distorted exhaustion to give way to the huge withdrawal of new refrain could emerge in the moment of my bad economic growth in general and like could be in the law of accumulation and growth. Next off, the United States should implement a modified mandated choice program for organ and donation based on the Illinois model, increase public outreach for organ donation, including methods such as social media, and create training programs for doctors and nurses and best practices regarding discussion of organ donation with family members. Mandated choice solves the case. Baylor at 9. The market allowing the selling of organs, the idea is spectacularly unpopular. Many people consider it helpful, crying at the objective of rich people buying their mental health, the objective status of it. Do you support a self-governing legal market for organs with political amounts are mandated choice that rich people must indicate their preference doesn't seem not broken millions, but there's a need for New York driver's license. You are required to answer to even to be an organ donor. The state has a 60% donor time rate, which were higher than the national rate of 38%. The first person consent makes one switches to be a donor legally binding. The mandate to put the to be a higher rate than prison consent, avoiding upsetting of those who have prison consent. Next up, altruistic donation is increasing and the status quo solves the shortage, but it depends on fragile public trust. The plan wipes that out and turns the case to Nichevich. And 8 arguments in favor of commercialized donations of the current system is stagnated and impotent to address the shortage is no longer through the rates of donation or setting through the organ donation breaker collaborative. The nation has risen 30% into one into innovative endeavors, including exchange intending and desensitization after circulatory determination of death and extended criteria can use the number of candidates. Deep trans level has not been stable over several years. It's not a pie in the sky to look forward to rejecting the waiting list to acceptable levels of continued progress is being made. All of these expanded like the altruistic success to date organ sales regulated otherwise will inevitably undermine the considerable gains in non-commercial organ donation transfer will be faster by investing in public trust and not undermining it. And they can't increase supply. Population polls prove the app aggravates all causes like distrust in U.S. healthcare and NKF. And 3, payment for organs create the ability to increase the supply spectacle of families who refuse 92% of the payment will not have persuaded them. Many Americans are not alive because they distrust the U.S. healthcare system. Financial incentives not likely to change the perception may aggravate distrust, making incentives available open the possibility of creating new sources. Case. Bioprinting solves the upgrades in 14 3D printers may be splitting out human organs. The printers can reproduce the fact that system permanent organs can be used for drug testing or for research tests on animals. Printers can produce organs for transplant. Stay 2-year-old with their single infect built with their stem cells. They have each announced a price with the organization of critical functions of organ of build models like human kidneys, bone, cartilage, muscle, blood vessels, and lung tissues. Doctors will refuse surgery with the purchase of organs grants in 77. Even if commerce and organs are authorized by law, commerce can freely flourish and may never begin surgery so will not perform transplants. All things purchased organs, a brave surgeon might not be ostracized by his or her colleagues for unethical behavior, and regulations would be ineffective and unenforceable. In Nichevich and A, what kind would be required in the test tumors are excluded and it's not clear how these could be legally achieved. Donors still the entire responsibility have to ensure that the factors are not applicable in info is accurate. His responsibility will be to check on consistency of documents that come to attention. The regulated system can be tacked onto our current system. It's unrealistic. Systems are not trained to be police or agents, and the INS should not take this role. And the illegal market is sensationalist, anti-science myth. The reproduction of it collapses donation and causes violence. Leventhal and 94 rumors that children be kidnapped so they can be unwilling donors. Brand nobody has ever produced evidence to substantiate destroyed the organ trafficking rumors and never legend. Experts agree that it would be impossible to conceal murder for organ trafficking. Rape is a large number of people involved. Specific DNA technology needed the extremely short time that organs remain viable now for nature. Alleged activities that operations never be the organized or kept secret. False reports that done enormous statements that since were attacked by Moxley, Guatemala, the rumors harmed in a country. Adoption caused widespread fears in Latin America. Poses the danger of causing numerous premature deaths at least decrease in donation. In 1994, cornea donation collected decreased 90% after false charges of cornea theft, and their conception of scarcity is artificially inflated to justify present neoliberal policies of organ donation, shepherd use, and 3. The demand for organs driven by the medical discourse on scarcity, the sector of virtual physical material basis in reality of motivated questionable practices of harvesting with compensating gifting doctors acting as brokers. The idea of scarcity is an artificially created need offended by the technicians single for the eyes of a dying population. The artificially created organ scarcity is recognized that cannot return to their dying done. Or drawn from the population is disproportionately poor, market disproportionately poor. Page 2. The 1AC's attempt to preemptively bracket out our argument functions as a normalization of the doctrine of preemption, the impact of biopolitics, and the destruction of the rights of life go. And 6, crime prevention approaches its absolute perfectivity, the spirit of the preemptive trials of real world conjured up by military and police measures. The right to be alive is violently privileged and active. The preemptive one is seldom to be able to think of another less violent solution as long as the preemptive is institutionally given a path to normalization. The right to be alive would slowly erode the conditional linkage from the state's political capture, the desire to gain critical time on the intensifies the speed of the machine that's preemptive does not wait for sponsors and space for its agreement to allow the normalization. The preemptive would be the legitimation of an absolute or extreme biopolitics control and individual bodies that state through the time of knowledge of the preemptive become up for some reason that contemporary life when risk manage the freedom of life to biopolitical capture does that space of absolute war.
Critique, can anything be done to help extend life?
What do you mean?
Like in the world of the alt, can you do anything to help your own life?
Well, it depends on your conception of life as like biological, social, symbolic. We critique your notion that life is purely, or life and death are both purely biological.
The answer-
Okay, can you increase your social or other forms of life?
Yeah.
Okay, why is the app mutually exclusive with that increase? In
We
fact,
have
if,
limits.
if people want, for social purposes, to have organs in the status quo, why should they not be given that ability?
Our argument is that the presence of the 1AC in the context of death is one particular reason why the 1AC is bad.
Okay, if more of the one, if is suffering something that should be considered?
What do you mean by suffering?
People who are in vast amounts of pain. Is that something relevant, or does the alt just say sucks?
We don't say sucks for them, but the point of the alternative is that we have to learn to live with strife in life. That's the whole point.
So you should never do anything to change. You should fight back against.
Well, the other
any
argument is
form of
that
strife.
can never be
the argument?
resolved
Wait,
under
wait.
a system of commodification in the first place.
If you are suffering, is it okay to take acts to relieve suffering if that is possible? Or no?
I mean, not within the not in the framework of capitalism.
What is it? The framework of commodification is you do something for a result, or is it something different?
It's not you do something for a result. Specifically, we critique the idea that of like selling your body for
Okay, can
money.
people work in the world of thought? Can you have people who choose to do labor? Why is that not selling your body? Like you use your body, and part of your body is destroyed through that use of it because cells are constantly dying, and that you get something for it. Is that something that is allowed in the world of the alt? People like doing it.
Depends what you mean by work. Our feedback is going to get to the moment of exhaustion or refusal of practice of work in that sense.
Okay, if everyone understood a refusal to buy and sell organs, what's the problem with the app? So like if you legalize sale and everyone said no, why is the app a bad thing?
Because the way you framed it still posits that it's an initiative outside of modernity by which you sort of otherize it.
It also
Okay, but
trades off with altruistic donation based on
But the alt also says,
structural
the alt
processes.
also does say though that we should alleviate some forms of suffering, creating suffering as an ultimate other. Why does that not link to the cap? Or you say all suffering is
Because we don't have arguments because death is the outside of modernity.
Right.
So,
if the alt just creates a new outside of modernity, which is like this thing is bad and we're always
I don't
excluding it,
think
aka
you
suffering,
understand how symbolic exchange works. That's
Okay.
not-
are the counterplan and alt conditional?
status quo is always an option.
Can you get clicks? Altruism DA, what's the uniqueness argument given that most people on the list are dying?
That altruistic donation is increasing. It also
From
postdates your
08.
evidence.
Our
Yeah, your
evidence
evidence
is
is from 2006.
We have it from this year. But last question is, are you saying that people whose organs are stolen didn't really experience that?
Do you want to take forever to answer that?
Yeah.
It's not that there aren't people who have had their organs stolen. It's that the construction of that as a broad system is a myth.
But saying it operates sometimes is true.
So the construction of it as just like a massive monolithic system where people like
So like saying capitalism causes a sustained illegal market where everything is bad.
No, the argument is not monolithic systems aren't true. The idea is that a clandestine illegal market is impossible. That's our Leventhal evidence.
Okay. I'm just wait, why does the app say that there's a clandestine illegal market? It's like there are people who illegally do things.
I mean, this
like the only
isn't all use time, but the
oh wait, sorry. Does the alt provide uniqueness for the scarcity term or the scarcity critique or the preemption critique?
The net benefits of that counterpoint is the modification.
Sorry, is the preemption argument resolved by more net benefits either way?
What we have is preempted.
Send your triple to busy work. Thanks. No problem, dude. Take your time. Oh, I will.
Like, answer your question.
Your version of time.
We haven't done. Yes, I guess.
even covers in the baby. You never know. Bioprint. I see one of those today.
People on our team just put wrong on long. That's the first thing I did was just kind of get the
It is a thing. I've like read a lot about this, and I'm kind of convinced it's not a thing. I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but I don't think so.
Maybe the debate will decide that.
Like I said, I find that really unlikely. Okay, it'll be the organs page, the framing page, the counter plan, the DA, and then the K.
Organs, DA counterplan K or
Counter plan DA K.
Uh,
Yeah,
550 because
We took more time for me to add that card. Yeah. Can I shut this door?
Can you actually move it
Slightly. Oh.
Sorry.
Sorry. Good timing this. Is everybody ready? Bioprinting is read a negative authors of 3D printing media high client. Unfortunately, there's so many obstacles for bioprinting. While overly simple media reports, just printed organ might be right around the corner. Might take another decade or so until these become market reality. Several fronts to manage to create something that looks like an organ, but functionality is not there. They say doctors refute this is about the black market and how their stigma related to getting organs, people's bodies that have been harvested illegally. The afro is also the regulations. Unethical arguments about the black market that exists in other places and how that's been regulated. No reason why it's true for the affirmative beard evidence is better. There's also no impact on our regulations for recoveries. In 1020, the opportunity would reach be resembled to survey motherhood, welcome. Pay of the competition's harmability factor. Almost all of them say they motivated for strong desire, financial and humanitarian motives intertwined with them all the time. Even if it turns out somewhere they're rewarded. Donation will only charge low to people, but even that's the case, by doubt the massive loan can people make decisions from the standpoint of the recipient loan can still stand the benefit of most insofar as the waiting list and income regardless. Any plan should be ethically sound. Donors' decisions are thoroughly informed, their health is protected, they're rewarded. Ample this condition the way house and employee taxing incentive for continuation strikes as a game into public health. There's simply no good reason to oppose that. They say quality, the NDO evidence is better indicates when we create a legal market because it crowds out black market practices, unscrupulous behaviors, increase the quality of organs because you're not just ripping them out of random people's body, ensures health, and also make sure people have an economic incentive to protect themselves. That raises quality in the long term. The Taylor evidence describes that. They say the black market, their evidence is from 94 and doesn't assume 2 decades of statistics to prove that people are getting their organs snatched out of their bodies and that tons of human trafficking is happening. That is the Taylor evidence. This is also an irresponsible way of framing the debate. The Sheffield-Hughes evidence they read is bad, and there's a couple of reasons why the scarcity exists, and also disproves the first argument. Taylor, it's Sheffield-Hughes mischaracterization gives the impression the market is morally repugnant, spelling suppression, and conducive to engage in a bit of a market pro-market approach to based on the fundamental claim that it's morally acceptable for people to live at the age of organs and another without committing themselves to traditional claims that they have thus right to buy the organ we deny. That is morally acceptable for one person to continue to live without the other. We must reject not only markets that are altruistic tradition, sharing grounds rights to buy an organ. This signifies the bodily integrity and individual authority related to one's body, self-energy, people's ability to secret the pro-market arguments are not obviously not as wrong as Sheffield-Hughes portrays them to be. Also, scarcity is real. There's no other way of explaining how people die. This evidence is old and propaganda. The framing advantage. We don't bracket out any of their discussions. We simply answer them in advance. Everything is preempted because you make an argument to answer another argument. There's no delineation between what we did. They could still read their arguments. Obviously, also representations don't matter. The debate is about the plan. The rule of the vote should be a referendum on whether the plan is a good idea or not, which means it shouldn't matter whether we preempted their arguments or not. There's no bright line for what the 1AC would do. Go to the counterplan. Permutation to both the counterplan also links to the net benefit. There's no reason why it wouldn't crowd out altruism. If it does, then it links to the net benefit, or otherwise it doesn't solve the case. It just extend the Bureau doesn't solve the step that justifies rejecting the counterplan because moderate reforms that only partially solve prevent long-term solve means people die in the long run. Public education campaigns will be the Catholic African 30 public service effective. The evidence for the public and support offering donation offered are difficult to find. Public fields are unlikely to be effective given the nature of organ donation. Offers find no evidence that any significant demographic factors are the primary determinant for recruiting success. They accept the pervasive advertising fights and effects by the attitudes of measuring or different cadavers don't solve, which means that if literally everybody signs up to be an organ donor, they still couldn't resolve enough the organ waste back in the license. The long-term outcome of medical transplantation depends on the quality of the match. The time concerns make it hard to get an excellent match. Life transplants give them much larger flexibility and time. Most crucially, the present gap between demand and supply cases do not be fully met from cavity without the full payment for their organs being usable. Cadaver organs must have had healthy, well-functioning organs to be free of infection at the time of their death. The majority of cadaveric organs come from an accident or stroke. This also doesn't solve the black donated organs. They've also conceded there are other reasons people don't donate, included fear of death and the fact that it's difficult to confront families. The counterpoint doesn't change. That means that people wouldn't donate even if it was mandated for them to indicate conditionality as the voting issue makes it impossible to do what they do because they can force us to read contradictory offense, and we can't stick them to either when they can dispositionality solve all of their offense and provides enough to ground go to the dissent. There's no crowd of altruistic people would still be altruistic. The moral standpoint Humphreys intend 20 altruism is a beautiful gift, but it's clearly not enough. We think about organ sellers, goods will never be enough. The net will amount to needless suffering will continue. The global black market in organs will continue to flourish. Crowding out is unlikely. Have no shortage of blood, plasma, A's, sperm, or cadavers because donors or remunerated data suggest voluntary activities in such contexts are not suppressed as long as the meaning is preserved. Would be donors could direct the financial equivalent of their benefit option to a needed party such as Red Cross. They could leverage the altruism helps us support another set of people with possible enrichment or health. Are people going to attract the altruism alone fails, but the market doesn't discourage the reserves. Armies proves that can license have another argument raised against the paying for organs by reducing the supply of organs for altruistic reasons. Paying for the organs will encourage donors who are somewhat altruistic, but for those who do altruism alone is not enough. Altruism alone clearly is insufficient to motivate to fill the demand for donated organs under the present system. Most effective answer to the critics of paying for organs of the represent the system imposes for intolerable burden on thousands of very ill individuals who suffer and sometimes die from the waiting list until suitable organs become available. Increasing supply through payment largely eliminate their weight. Also, there's only a risk of the absolute. The impact of the dissat is the status quo where people have to go to the black market and die on the waiting list. There's no differential between that and the impact of the dissat, which means you would always vote on the risk that the affirmative solves go to the K.
Doesn't hurt trust.
Oh, doesn't hurt public trust. There's no reason why it spills over to other realms of trust. Also, the fact that there are unscrupulous medical practices now in organ markets, which is described by the 1AC Taylor evidence, indicates that trust should have already been fractured. Okay. Framework. We get to weigh the 1AC. Anything else obvious. 9 minutes. The 1AC unpredictably shifts the focus of the debate. So we can never be at permutation. Do the average reject the modification? There's no reason why there's exclusive performance that avoids the worst form of capital and permanent left and Marx when the hard-going class politics. Marx politics is subordinated by economic direction. Inspired no major political movement. And predictions about the inevitable collapse of capital were untrue. The capitalist system was becoming increasingly complex and adaptive. The correct rule was to reform it using the power of existing democratic systems. It was possible to eliminate capital and worst effects and harnessing its vast ones. The social democratic movement and then the most important legacy of the Marxist tradition. Social democracy stands committed to protecting their citizens from the worst forms of excesses of capitalism, reading in the market forces to reap capital to the North benefits in order in 1945 had to do class conflict, journey and levels of prosperity and social equality greater than the world had previously experienced. Now there is always an outside means they don't solve the otherization of their impact. And if they win that death is not real, then there are no terminal impacts of decay. You can vote A on the risk that we do something. The root cause of capitalism is not the root cause of every impact. Jurists in 5 realities of human violence can be treated as the product of capitalism, even between Marx and other left thinkers. This should be transparent. Political realities need to be fully recognized as such to collapse them too quickly into the figurative original causes to refer them to other things that perceive them as not to give them their due respect to specific phenomena evils of this order of causes of theory governed by political ideological moral possessive view that everyone is real. It's the capitalist economy. Nothing is systemic or independent. Patterns are cruelly within political structure. Now we can know the world and the app is true. Mediated perception does not mean reality is pure social concept. Force 97. Engagement is always mediated by language of social practice, but this does not imply the denial of reality of material whatever in. Of course, a real estate ontological assumption about what is real, what exists, manifests, is thus not something that one can dispense with Heidegger and suggest common sense that gives us a sense of realness. And there is the real world with real people, animals, and plants. No valid cryptobusines has ever been proposed to characterize the science of human intuition is controlled by rational because of the reality of the material world is always taken for granted for human survival depends upon acknowledging and engaging with it. Now, even if we can't know the right course of action, taking action in what seems to be the best description boosts personal value and provides new information experiences which can change the world. Lecture enough where you probably have the experience of feeling stuck. Life will seldom deliver a perfect replica of your mental picture. However, whether or not you feel certain churches and writing, you may take a small step in spite of your doubt or confusion. There is great power in action. Movement will break you free. This amendment decision and actions of ripples of energy drops to change the world. And death is the ultimate evil. It is a metaphysical lightning strike that obliterates what it means to be human in our present state. There is no possible warrant for their argument. Patterson and throughout is the best that is really the objective evil that is the ultimate. And the metaphysical lightning strikes death is truly an ontological evil born by the person who already exists independent of calculations about better or worse possible life. Such an evil need not be consciously experienced in order to be the evil of the kind of a human being is death is radical interference with the current life process, the kind that we have to be aware of regardless of the extent to which they are currently or prospectively capable of participating in a full range of the goods of life. Any intentional rejection of human life cannot therefore be warranted, since it is an expression of the ultimate desire of the life, the destruction of the present person, a radical ontological good that we cannot begin to weigh objectively against the travails of life of the rational manner. Hey Brian, can I see your timer? I forgot to set mine.
Yeah, mine's also a little behind.
132.
Awesome. There's no policy failure. Language is clear enough to make common assumptions. There's truth and the app can be good. Harvey in 97 does not clear the multiple. We should act as if truth is. The alt fails reject their lines of neoliberalism. Starting with the neoliberalism encourages radicalism, oversimplification, and greater levels of co-optation. The positive pragmatic parties are identify something that neoliberalism like coherent hegemonic party neoliberalism by such a wide array of various actors out there who are always from disengaging and resistance. Stories about neoliberalism reduce the understanding of social relation and residual effect of hegemonic parties. They little attention to the proactive role of social culture process and provoking changes. Hegemonic neoliberalism models that is the ad hoc accommodations and process of privatization, market liberalization, fall in the ironic pattern of always being triggered by citizens. Movements argued for the left against the rigidities of status, social policy, and welfare, and the greater autonomy of political realignments cannot be understood in the terms of the shift from the left to the right. Theories of neoliberalism have difficulty accounting for new forms of emerging hand with neoliberal hegemony, environmental policy, sustainable neoliberalism, such a simplistic image of the world divided between conversion. Climbing to this image makes it more difficult for the to acknowledge the possibility of positive political action that does not conform to the romanticized picture of a Baylor conversion between the radical left and the right-wing interpretation. We'll find out even if we know the responses. What? Yeah, commodification is inevitable and there's no impact to it. That's described in the Shirley and the Dear Diamond 1AC. There's no reason why it's different than the status quo. And the alt failed the response of the failure politics to approve of the negative civil list could be returning and due to the possibility of reform Mikowski. In 95, one was not aware of how to basic morality can be reversed does not mean the loss of human capacity for building, preserving, and care for the world can survive and remain. For those who come after us and care for the world of the freedom, the task of politics of freedom, the way of the world may be taken by all the political actions where it takes us all the freedom of art and attempts to find a way the dilemmas of minority, including the political soul, to that.
I wonder if we have that you can see.
Yeah, it's
Oh, where is it?
Biskowski 95.
How do you spell it? Sorry.
Biskowska.
Okay, cool. Ready?
Let me mark that. Yeah, go for it.
Sure. So your beard evidence, if public education campaigns fail, then how do you educate people about the plan?
We don't have to educate people about the plan in the sense that evidence is talking about. That says that like trying to raise awareness about donation doesn't work, which is not what the plan does.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so the permutation, how do you do the app reject modification?
Sure. Our argument is that A, there's nothing intrinsically like commodifying about the app that's any different than everything else, right? It's like we make value judgments about things. The app is a value judgment about things.
So wait, if everything is commodification, then how does the permutation issue that commodification?
Well, sure. Our argument is like from double bind-esque, which is like if you think you can reject commodification in the instance of the way it exists in the world, there's no difference in the way the app would be incorporated into that.
Okay,
Everything is commodified. If you can break that down, then the action of the affirmative is not something that is intrinsically incompatible with the idea that we can reject the idea of
Okay.
commodification.
Thank you. Your affirmative evidence says that the worst parts of capitalism can be solved when social democracies protect their citizens from that. Is that the U.S.?
Well, the Berman evidence is about how like reformism when like putting restrictions on the market, i.e. like the things described by the Beard evidence and like the Taylor evidence.
So what's your reform?
Yeah, our argument is that we change the way free market would work. So instead of
I guess
free-
how?
Yeah, the restrictions that are placed on the organ market are an example of that. It's like we don't allow like an unrated market to happen. We're just like there's a way we can make it so that people have restrictions.
And what restrictions do you place on the organ market?
There are a ton of them. There are things like the ability for monopolies to exist. It's a state-controlled system, so that there's like not companies that come into power. There's restrictions on like how healthy you have to be to sell an organ. There's restrictions on like the way that waiting times are imposed, so that people don't just like go and sell their organ without being informed about it, and those sorts of things to make sure that it's like healthy, that it's safe, and that it's something that people actually know they want.
Okay. You claim that action is good for personal value. Is that your personal value? Or whose personal value, I guess?
I mean, it's sort of a general argument about the way action can be motivating to create life. So it's not like Brian and I independently like probably find values in different ways.
To
And it's like
create
not
life? I guess
descriptive
what does that
is.
mean?
Hmm?
What does it mean, I guess, to create life?
If I said
You
to
said,
create life,
yeah,
I
action is
said-
good to create
I
life.
meant to create meaning in life.
Okay. So how do you measure meaning in life?
Well, that's the point. It's like subjective. Like you might feel meaning differently than I do, but the idea that you can like take an action to enhance your idea of what creates value for you is motivating.
Okay.
Like if you have the ability to do that, whatever your framework for determining value is something you can then act in accordance with to empower yourself.
The argument that self-referentiality is an abdication of morality, why is that true?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
This is, I think, the last part that you read.
The Bukowski evidence? Or it says that's just a reason why the alt is bad and just like turns itself inwards to reject like political realities.
Okay, so internal deliberation is bad?
It just says it's morally irresponsible to turn away from the world, just like ignore the political orientation. That
I
we
guess,
have.
how do you, okay, that's fine.
We didn't go through that.
Choose your favorite. The one that's
No,
Do you get like a little
that's exactly what I was thinking. She does. Oh, yeah. Approval. They just their eyes or
Yeah, because you spawn both of them. They're the same. They're the same. Same hair color. Also, Dad of the year. Talked to her last night. She walked around.
certainly offers.
It's just like because like this doesn't do that concept.
Yeah, that last part of the document that she read was it only
It's the last part.
Oh,
Ice caps. I don't know if it's for short. Cool.
actually.
Shirley.
reading.
Yeah, I came into the store. Are you? And I
That seems like a lot of time.
Were there any? Oh, good. Because otherwise, you are pronouncing everything wrong. Bastards to die.
Cards. Yours the K. Shocker. Really, Curtis? You're in the middle of such a magnificent debate, and you're just doing whatever on your
Let me do this.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
He is right. He is right that your last name starts with a.
What is my defining characteristic?
For him, it's the defining characteristic. Yeah, there's a sort of ranty thing at the top about that one.
Go get some cake.
Yeah.
It's not all
Oh, it's going on eventually. All right. Everyone, all set?
Yeah.
They concede the vast majority of our argument. We're not a cap gay, but a neoliberalization of death gay. The vast majority of their arguments aren't applicable. Systems of exchange are structured in mode of politics. There are two systems. One is the regime of equivalence, which demands equal value in objects trade. For example, buying a Camaro for 50 grand is a one-to-one use value. Proven like when Klarman says that people only act in defense of particular forms of postulative calculation. Two is the symbolic exchange. The opposite of that system is a form of exchange that maintains and organizes social relations, not based on any form of commodification or demand for equivalence. The firm mirrors the regime of accumulation in two ways. Not only does it demand financial compensation, but it be given to a currently altruistic act, but the overall justification is ultimately for the prolonging of life and the banishment of the possibility of national death. Robinson indicates that this is a form of death control creates the idea that death is the absence of life, creates a binary between living and the dead, which is the foundation for the all exclusion ever. This is a conceded argument that provides the justice that says that the judgment of an alive body is productive, and in opposition to the excess of death is symptomatic of a regime of accumulation, which is based on a community of the living, racism, sexism, homophobia, able to operate by the conception of universal white, able-bodied male, which is able to productively invest in his community. That is a form of that form of consumption relies on the abolition of death, which is the accumulation of assets, and is the only benchmark provided that forecloses the possibility of its symbolic exchange, which creates an understanding of objects based on utility, which is the foundation for the human nature divide, constant ecological structure through a narrative of disposability, which is an external anthropocentrism to said to the no impact defense then out of politics. The question to create a comfortable, safe existence for subjects they can't possibly fathom, a form of death that they could potentially defer, justifies the control of death by the state. Any future conflict must preemptively be eliminated, and perpetuators dispose of preemptively internal link towards any internal, which is massive state war. This adds to the entirety of the framework. The alternative is the status quo. Our argument, our interpretation is that we should be able to criticize the one's justifications prior to questions and limitations. This is fair. They have to win. Their assumptions are worth the voting plan. If vacuum means to vote negative after assumption, there is no reason to vote for them. They can't sever the representation world in which they use the voting issue for strategies given the TVC fairness and fairness and unpredictability are meaningless. Death is the most predictable and unpredictability forms a foundation for contemporary debate practice. Their framework arguments fight over mind. Space the body. We have all the cells make it function. To them, a body has been diseased by the drive to survival destroys the intensity of life, reduces life to its lowest common denominator. Brzezinski and sacrifice destroys that. Sacrifice burns like that. We did not fool death here. Provides for being death that makes us spectators. Reevaluation values renders the meaning for death and credit for human as if they lifted directly against the review of Perseus. The trick against Medusa safety here provides knowing that we all may have enables a taste of death. Life moves into with high stake, maybe not be rest of the year. Not constantly remaining under sanctions, which are danger refers to mental paralyzed by thought. Under the paralysis of thought, disaster, defense, use food, death, right, brings elevating on teaching exclusion, sacrifice, breaks through. Yeah, there's fullness and annihilation. Sacred horror opens up like death. They determine every meaningful transfigure, figure, the present death is similarly defined. Intent, that's a possibility. So life is full as well as the survival limits of life. The death, where we find where life I find solely their structure. Sacrifice is an affirmation to men opposed to normal set or things they can't be body kosher, or the opposite opposition, search of death and life to meet death is necessary to it's necessary of life to have any value. What makes us human? There are we don't link any of their friends. We're critiquing the reasons why you vote for the plan anyway, as well as we have a specific link argument to the plan takes also and they can win the one. They have to win their value judgments are good first. Your politics are passively attenuating. Antonio 95. I'm reading the green part. The subject gets the pro-tip against every result by all justification
state for slavery around each other. Considerable external phenomena, fusion, personal identification for other specific change with person, especially with their position there. So observe similarly reflect the role players sexually anything but spontaneous pleasure, right? Over kind of serving constantly onto action, conversation, member, be much before substation as shadows, then where South Coach proposed the attachment is principles and threat for all country defense officer, where they play worse than her these findings, what is scheming that deadly comments we wait for a new time. The permutation when we answer the 1 hour, however, like we'll do the link debate here. There's multiple link arguments to the plan text. Step 1 is neoliberalism, the legalization of organ sales allows for the wealthy white individuals who have the access to advanced biomedical hospice care to live indefinitely by simply purchasing an organ. The only individuals that will sell their organs are those they're economically dispossessed, forced in a situation out of economy. The plan allows for bourgeoisie capitalism to commodify, instrumentalize, support, turn their economic suffering into a new and favorable opportunity. That's Jill Brett. The thesis of removing government regulation to allow the free market to work as matches. The textbook definition for neoliberal casino capitalism. Even if they result in a sort of new form of free market, new form of free market leftism, they're still beholden to free market. Some point B is utilitarianism. The quantification of suffering assumed by the one who highlights the ultimate failure of utilitarianism. They allow the oppressed to become the cookie cutter unit equation of benefits and losses, reduces individuals' mere numbers on a bioethicist calculator. That's Jill Brett. This turns the entire after criticism of utilitarian foundation at the bottom of the one you see ratified by their own rhetoric. Further, if we prove they invoke the system of catastrophic death through all of our arguments against talk about medic converts natural death into mere use battle, which then no longer matters, means that they invisibilize the population that they talk about in the one you see. There are a couple other link arguments based on both the tagging of the one you see as well as the crossing. The tag of their third fear card says the longer we wait, the worse it gets. This is for fear-based false, which means action in the face of uncertainty, which demonstrates action in the face of uncertainty. I'm going to do more specific link arguments to that sort of actionability. Second, because that demonstrates that they're still based on sort of fear-oriented utilitarian calculation that they critique in the one you see. Second, the tag of their first fear card says the death will only multiply with time. This is the sort of catastrophization of death, whereby certain populations are whereby death is deemed to be the sort of ultimate evil, whereby we cannot allow any transgression of death into the system in order. Otherwise, we can allow any sort of transgression of death into the system. Otherwise, what if more death comes into the system? What if we all die eventually? Which is the sort of catastrophic death impact, which invisibilizes natural death, which I talked about a second. Their tag of their Bullock and it says any all objections be affirmed price first deciding between those who on the list can die. This is also the sort of coercion of the security system. The idea that any opposition to prolonged living is thus murder is the blackmail of security states. They say that in crossing he says the humanization, which holds the idea of a coherent human subject, which is defined in opposition to death, which is demonstrated the fact that they think that becoming closer to death is a bad thing. They also says that suffering is tyranny to a subject, or impact during their conception of subjectivity, which is something I'll explain in a second. Biological scientific understanding of death is constant slavery to the myth of the subject. Bojack 36. No, that's hard to explain. The earth is biological, that's modified to scientific culture. Every culture says death begins before death goes on. Every west try to use the radical intermediate death as the of our ideas control by representation. Death articulate becomes so to make life or consequence of death. Like nor death against something. There's no definition that we are living within. Evolution is not this illusion of something. They only need fantastical space in additional something because death can inverse will mean death is not event by myth. There's something is an event, so then force identity of something for really there's always already something else. Trapped in senseless gypsy an endless cycle. Impaired by death is death that makes you conjure up less for a second. Death body utilizes centuries and each other. Death objectifies bodies, body object takes revenge by ideology. This is last moment as well as which principle of technical operation of real and the world. Some point C is politics of death. One C models a techno-scientific insistence on the essential life. Mail-in evidence indicates that selling of organs just based on the assumption that biological death is an evil that must be combated at all costs. Receiving an organ does not rescue the living from the need to die. Only defers the day when they will have to do so through their own dying. Their term medicine to a crusade for death plagued by constant bad shortages or cures for one another deadly ailments construct death as a problem to be solved rather than to be endured. This form of prolonged life definitely prevents an understanding finality, which is necessary for us to enjoy subjective preference by state like McGowan. 13. We must imagine there's fields death. This is also a source of value without love. Death provides ever love, ice cream, friendship, no anything we're having infinite time. You know, after we have left unable to enjoy makes life worth living experience. Depends on the defined to the short researching process. But divine once leads to the majority of death doesn't extinguish by best bringing all things relation death and not the opposite life. The only factor is by with nothing as far as life is actually eluding death. Privilege life over death and words in terms of life rather than death. I'm gonna mark that card rather than death. They magnify such matter policies impact organ cells are based on upon an idea the system can only prevent particular forms of death, which assumes that if the only legitimate death is one the system authorizes that this is the benchmark for preemptive violence against the other and threatens non-threatening form of death. There appeal to time from the concepts of organ scarcity. The link by later says this inception demand for action ultimately produces a colonization of our ethical questions concerning death. It also proves their impacts over and transplant lists have been artificially inflated by consumers' attitudes and distorted in the belief they can be translated to resolve even the most vibrant seasons. They say reformism. I don't think you make capitalism ethical. There's no part of the one which actually does. This is largely irrelevant argument. Some sort of revolution. I'll explain the alternative here. The alternative is exhaustion of consumption. The system thrives off constant demand for action or against exploitive practice. Any action is reoriented based on the demand for productivity. The alternative is to reject this action oriented policies and adherence experience this actual, even if it causes mass death. This form of radical passivity allows the system to be given the gift of death, which cannot be returned to make the demand for equivalent that short link to Robinson's short link to Robinson is predicated off of. They say that we authorize suffering. This argument is asinine. Only we have evidence that indicates that the exclusion of the exclusion of death is the foundation for modern political spheres. They have no evidence that indicates that the exclusion of suffering or something is bad. We are in agreement that suffering is probably a bad thing in some sense, but it is a question of what sort of suffering you privilege. They say cap's not the root cause. Sure, but we have evidence indicates that equivalence as well as the exclusion of death in the modern political sphere is the root cause, which means that you don't get to answer that argument the one yard. They say the world is real. We're not a cave simulation, and the Baudrillard says we obviously reality is mediated representation, but there is, I guess, an objective world. That's not our point. They read this Wexler, it's about action being good. This is foundation for all violence. Never control the act. Question how to do the act. Whether you do against work is rather radical passivity, back up, pass, and excess and doing nothing. The kid never humans got off from his or her petty action. That's halting the act he or she does that. To force which he has lost control. Nothing is much more less extreme, but confidentiality separate from what you do, from what they can do. They can resist those separate from confidentiality. Capacity to say arguments such as separate from lack of power, attempted equal press, like the law of without power, as constantly shifting to the answer forms subject by these like taking subject responsible very subjectification, short life expedition society of formation identity, correction, identity, observing active something as long as think of something resistant power via liberal action. We can liberate ourselves from power relations. That card's marked to power relations. They say commodifications and inevitable. Obviously, the alternative. They say neoliberalism is bad because at least radicalism we're not some sort of radical resistance or rev. They say alt fails. This is just this links to all of our critique. Yeah, this evidence is also just a critique of generic Baudrillard simulations.
You say the alt is exhaustion. That means we just like don't take action.
In this particular instance, yeah.
So let's say I'm a person on the waiting list. Can I receive an order?
Well, I think the point of our argument is that from within our specific subject position for them today, whether or not they choose to advocate action
Okay,
is
sure.
actually relevant.
As a person in today, can I donate to help save someone's life? Is that an action of the alt is like?
Not in the, donate an organ, sure. Sell an organ, no.
Why? Both are in an
because-
attempt to prolong somebody's life. What is the difference?
Because, well, we're not a criticism of like the action. In that
You
sense,
have
we're
read
not.
links about an attempt to prolong life. Why would
The prolonging life arguments are based on the one-seat representations, i.e. the sort of analysis I did about how like you're like people will continue to die, the list will only get worse, death is coming, and it was going to only to get worse in time. Like,
sure, I guess I don't understand the difference between like framing it that way and being like we should sell organs, framing it that way and being like we should do it.
Because the justifications for doing so, like our
How do you
argument is
know
that
someone's justification?
because you said this is the reason you should do the 1AC.
Okay.
Like you
So
had
the
impact
evidence says
arguments.
that the acknowledgement that death exists allows us to proceed. This is like ice cream bread. Why is the acknowledgement that death is like a thing preclude the ability to also understand that it's something?
Because the 1AC isn't just the acknowledgement that death is the thing. The 1AC is attempt to defer
Sure, but the
and
only
stave off
part
death.
this evidence
You
makes
present-
for why we should acknowledge death is like knowing that death is going to happen makes us realize there's the 1AC is definitely acknowledged.
I don't think that our evidence just says you should acknowledge that death exists. Our argument is that the attempt to defer off death destroys the intensity that
Sure.
provides value
I
to
guess-
life in the first place,
okay,
which is
there's
both
an-
the Brzezinski
There's an
evidence and the
attempt to
McGowan.
defer death and death row to people who have the black market. What would the alternative be about it?
Well, what do you?
Like,
It's
what
a
is-
question
how
of ethical orientation.
Yeah, I understand. How does
Right?
the alternative ethically orient itself towards people who are going to the black market?
You would say that's bad because
So
it's
they
still
should not be
life. I would say that yeah, we think that life preservation in opposition to death is bad. Right?
Okay. Is there no implication to biological?
Is there no implication to it? Things happen when our cells die. and
What
stuff.
happens? Like, what is the difference between biological life and biological death?
Well, part of our argument is that the idea that there's a hard line of exclusion between the two is a false view.
Okay,
We're always
that's
in a
not true,
consistent
then what
process
is
of
the
dying, which
there's
is
not a hard line. What happens when someone biologically dies?
I don't think we've like made a science argument about like there's consciousness after.
So if we don't know
Yeah,
what happens, how can we create an ethical orientation?
Because we've read. Wait, what do you mean? Our argument.
Well,
Your
like, we don't know
response
what
to that
happens.
question is that we
Let's
should
assume
then.
that it's bad to think that we have.
Your initial response is assume death is bad because it's unknown. It's that fear of unknowability which we have said is the root of all lies.
The order is the disad, the critique, the counterplan, and case page 1 and case page 2. Anyone not ready? Cool. Let me know when you are. Disad not going forward. Extend there's no link. There's no office on this page. Go to the critique. They say action good and imposing a death on other people is bad, but first no one chooses death. Death chooses you. The obsession with managing exact circumstances under with death. The rise converts the process of living into hiding in a bunker, which destroys value creation. Their argument is fundamentally tautological. Life is good because life is good. That's not an argument. Second is voting against murder is dangerous political blackmail because it rally against all philosophical defense of rebellion, nihilism. McGowan says that was the question. We are constantly choosing our own life in this round. We should trouble our certainty and choose death. Value to life. Disad to the app. And 3 is that the app does not resolve death. Third world populations of claim results from debate subject hypertrophy, which imagines in-round performance capable of resolving suffering. This round doesn't do that, nor the next. And reaffirms politics is an political state managed with the root cause of all violence is a human nature divide instituted by the violent attempt to distinguish the living from the dead. And people will choose poorly. Humans are psychologically wired to lie to themselves about the pain and suffering of the world. Life is not all right, and we must destroy the future of Lugatti. And 12, consciousness will longer prevail for human beings. If we didn't do something about it, most people learn to take this by artificially limiting the content of consciousness and plunder the required health corrections rights and ideas of consciousness created of all force becomes susceptible to the thoughts. We were traveling a dreadful thoughts that have never been adequately balanced by those that are collecting our minds now begin dredging out force and that they make us drop the ground and their oxygen with self-soiling consternation with the potential of the United States. Certain defense mechanism to keep us on this and I pitch vitality of speech even need to hammer our consciousness through will impose upon us a provisional will be not to see which the brother of the suffering between everything else like we are free expectancy of life. Said it's just set of for ourselves. We don't know, but not to mention content ourselves as surviving, we're producing time. We know we are alive. We also know we will suffer during our lives before suffering. We want there to be more than tragedy. Consciousness is more present a paradoxical position of striving to be unself-conscious of what we are. Hopeless, spoiling flesh on disintegrating hoods of life is a competence strictly and self-depreciation to free our species of the paradoxical imperative to our backstabbing method to create so much of will applies to cause of reproduction. Human extinction, the sooner the better, and this means to willingly withdraw the no future triumph and to be the pitiful light of the human being is a economy even if that destiny is the means to survive from a head to a new mass death. The end of human existence, even choking our consciousness. She would say, deal by permutation, it is either doable, it is either severance or entrenchment. It's a voting issue to the 2 AC strategy spike out of links. Our links are due on the structure and principle of justification. The affirmative relies on me to separate from a discourse can't be your impact turning. The act affirming the status quo can't possibly do both, and there is no way to sell organs without commodification. That is the entirety of the link story. If we want any of the links, it demonstrates the act, the alternative operate on countervailing trajectories and means of permutation is political and philosophical nonsense. Now there, Western conception of death is incompatible with the old Butterfield, and 2, by exchanging with the death of ritual, they manage to impart the restraint death energy that back into the group little by little. The death seems to exist. Everyone else circulation today. It's not normal to be death. This new death is a link with you with no longer value, which you cannot be accumulated or consumed. The death that has no value. You get from nothing, expect nothing from the return of the death. Only humans of different nature than symbolic sacrifices. Everybody's fighting. A gift to living Christian Americans do not value death symbolically, but as a subtraction from life, seems to be slow. And then we cross death is in the end of life. We bifurcate our identities and get more eager for our eventual death. So the process would not last our whole life. The more we devalue our own death, and it's just granted to become totally held. I remember the obsession with death. People in the media fascinated with catastrophes like 9/11. Death becomes an object. A purpose and desired regimes of legalization cannot be divorced from neoliberal violence. The poor coerce into deconstructing their biological assemblages and prop up consumptive lifestyles with wealthy disregard claims of upward mobility and autonomy. These are ruses by the capitalist system to justify commodification of the body. Shepherd Hughes and 3 new relations between capital and labor and taking shape. Our discussion is how their material graph capitalism incited to desires for to use organs of others organ transplants exposed into transnational space with donors and recipients following new paths of capital transfer capabilities creating scarcity of organs and economic globalization releasing access to displaced persons and appetite for foreign bodies to do the shadow work of protection for provide correct consumption and the translation and aggravated over divisions between North and corresponding commodity fetishes which commercialized transplant and the domain of biopolicy with disposability of them exemplified by medical technology. I think it's surpass all previous natural limits and restriction the circulation of purchase kidneys and exemplifies the new liberal discourse based on concepts of autonomous individual subject equality of opportunity freedom and rights to commodified kidney currency part-time medicine, the privileges of one class that hastens over invisible and unrecognized non-patient circulation of kidney solids with the rest of the capital from north to south of the border to affluent black brown and white to female space and go to the counterplan. Mandated choice solves the entirety of the case. Thayer says at least a 60% donor sign up rate, which is sufficient to solve a waiting list of 120 people. The net benefit is the neoliberal portion to critique the permutation. Doesn't solve that because it still commodifies body in the order of sale. They say that awareness doesn't solve the counterplan, increase public awareness, which is sufficient to solve through things like Facebook, Spital in 98. Despite best efforts to educate the supplementing rain, make their system that would increase the supply for mandated choice, which applied to accomplish this. It would eliminate the family separate your mandated choice as well as the issues. They say cadavers don't solve the counterplan abuse available organs by hundreds of thousands. McArdle. No date speed institute of mandates choice authors an increase of 60,000 donor affiliates in the system. While around wall and Denmark increase the donor registry by 150,000 surveys of U.S. public opinion indicating 90% would support the mandate choice and 93% would honor the wishes of family members making their choice. And they say to solve trafficking. That's not true. Public outreach and mandate choice solves trafficking. Kelly. 13. Removing the cross-border trafficking would be more effective than the armored demonstration demand would be effectively addressed. The concept of trafficking and shifting presumption of favor to desirable results and choice may be more acceptable. Conditionality is good for snack flex and flexibility is key to checking advantages turns is the only way to offset act bias. They set the reference debate have infinite prep in the last fusion. Counter-interpretation two conditional world default to reasonability. If we didn't make it impossible to debate, don't vote us down. No right to act ground time stress. You're inevitable because the negative has an incentive to eliminate as much app often as possible. For strategic thinking, we force the app only to read their best arguments like this as an add-on. Bias education only way to encourage teams to run new counterplans to critique 6 no unique to offense. All arguments are conditional. There's no difference between extra counterplan and more topicality. Dispo doesn't solve. No one knows what it means, and you didn't put offense on the counterplan means no. And we're on differential case. The only argument I'm going for here is regulations fail. There is no way to regulate the accuracy of info. Citizenship proofs and all logistics and external responsibilities. That's Stanovich. And here it's proved Ruffman and 6 regulations may not be readily accomplished. How many measures might prove inoperative and double sided and eligible to enter the market oversight won't be easily established or maintain change and network carries an unintended consequences. Deregulated energy trading and amount scandals occur. Deregulated savings and lawlessness and corruption rates. How to related to limit the system and it's getting commodities. Now she reads a card about the plan being good for poor people. It's not just about surrogate mothers, which is essentializing. It says nothing about regulations, which means that those people get exploited even if selling their organs is good for them in the abstract. The preemption stuff, as long as preemptive is given a path of normalization, biopolitics is legitimated on the basis of targeting threats to the vitality of state and exterminating before they present themselves. She says all arguments are preemption. That's not true because the 1 and 2 wasn't there. Rule the ballot is arbitrary, and you should vote for the team that does better. Debating plan focuses. God.
Y'all have.
Yeah, I'll resend it. You're going to take out the president, right?
Not for sure. Yeah. I agree. Yes. Okay. Why do it? Just go there and start seeing pictures of it before they proceed. Yeah. Literally.
You what? 25.
So, 325 one? Yeah.
5. Wait, you said 515.
550 minus 225 would be
325. Yes. Yes. Good job today. You remember how to math.
the order is the advantage, framing, counterplan, critique. The critique's just going straight down. So overview 2 and C1 and on.
Does
Shirley was, or like the bottom.
I'm going to answer the parts of the link debate that you did, and then the rest of the things you did, and then I'm going to answer the parts of the link debate that she did. And then the rest
Really?
Straight down.
The blonde.
Anyone not good?
Organ church persist in the student church, which means that the affirmative is the only way to prevent people from endless suffering that's happening right now. The regulations are obviously sufficient because they would be able to overlook everything that goes in and out of a hospital, which is something that can't work. It is obviously not better than the status quo, which is the reason they usually default to it. They can see that it's not better for the persons in poverty because it means that they are able to sell their organs that they see as something that's completely necessary. Whereas right now they're being forced to do things like go to the military because of their situation. Obviously, our evidence is just about surrogate mothers as an example. I'm not saying that this is what all poor people are, but then says that how we can apply example to other instances. Now the framing argument we don't spell over to escape preemption. We'd rather say that here's our argument and here's the explanation of why it is relevant. They can see that everything is necessarily a form of preemption because you only read a card to preempt them saying your argument is wrong. There's also no net spillover argument which proves that this doesn't make any sense. Also, the entirety of the 1 and C is preemption to the 2 and C answers, which is why they read evidence on all of their budget arguments. Now, the counterplan is able to resolve any of the case because there are too many people with fear. Even if they're right, that people would read itself. They could see they would only be able to give up cadaveric organs at the end, which means that it would be less than 1% of what we need. It would also not work because if someone dies the way it damages their body, they obviously are not able to give up that part of their body, and we would have to wait till the exact timing, which proves that we would have to wait till someone dies, which proves that we don't have the exact timing to solve the suffering that's necessary. They can see if there's any risk of solving deficit, you should always default to the affirmative because these are the types of words that we use to always push off resolving the problem at. They've also conceded if there's a time frame solving the deficit, it always automatically means you default to us because it means that the black market will continue to exist when everyone cannot get a market at perfect time because it doesn't have a perfect match, which proves that you should always do default to us. The counterplan obviously makes it that benefit because it still uses a system that says that we should be giving up part of our body and making it into a material that can be used as a good, and there are still doctors working, which is part of the capitalist system, which proves that it will inevitably link. If they're right, the people will donate so much, then it means the permutation is able to resolve the net benefit because no one would have to sell any of their organs if everyone is donating them. Now, the critique. Framing issue. They weren't able to say, we don't say that you have to keep life alive, but that you should be able to give the choice of what you want to do with your life clients. They should be able to have the choice to sell their organs if they want to. They don't have a negative impact to the conception of sales, but rather that I can see that people have different incentive, which is that some people are only going to give organs if there is money. They have to see this is a useful heuristic because it can tell us how the market will work, and without it, the black market is inevitably going to function, which continues the exploitation and the exchanges that they are talking about. But it proves that the alternative is able to resolve any of these problems as they come up. We say that we should give them the option, not that they have to preserve the life. We don't continue the life that's binary for this reason. There's also no saying that they must. It's also important to realize that sometimes death and suffering are extreme scenarios that are bad, which is the point of how they want to see this. That we should give them the choice to alleviate that. There's no spillover to the other instances they are talking about because the permutation is obviously able to resolve them in, because we don't say that the irrational other is necessarily bad. We just point out that if you are in a position where you are in mass amounts of pain, you should be able to alleviate some of that pain. That means that there's no disposability, but that is also a list of the status quo because those on the list are said that they can die as if they are relevant, which is a stance the alternative also takes that certain groups of populations are relevant. They're radical others who we do not need to help. Permutations obviously able to resolve the discrimination and anthropocentrism arguments that they send here. Lastly, they can see that the status quo was a control of life, which is the biopolitics, because as their both from co-evidence would point out, the WAC, that we were saying that people cannot continue their lives as a form of productive power in order to eliminate those people, which is something the affirmative choice is solved by giving them the choice. If they're right that the alternative changes the way that individuals orient themselves toward life, then it just means that individuals would not buy or sell organs, but they would have the choice to do so, which means there's some negative impact of voting for the permutation. Now, the framework debate, the framework say get the one I see, and they critique it, but they have to provide us wrong why there's a better alternative. Anything else is if regress makes it impossible to be affirmative because they can prove more than one I see is bad and is not able to resolve any of the impacts they are talking about, because we would never have positive actions in order to solve things. Representations might be important, but they are not the only thing that matters, which proves that they you also have to propose an action, which is something they have failed to do. We don't say that suffering is necessarily the most evil thing in the world, but that some suffering in treatments is that can't be stopped, that is destroying the subject, is something we should eliminate. The role-playing argument doesn't make any sense because it is important as let's us know what institutional and self-made changes should be made, because we were saying what both can be at the same time, which means that we were able to resolve all this impact, and this is the only way to actually get an agenda through, which was the last continued argument that I made on case me when I see now the permutation extended is able to resolve all of their offense. They have conceded their regulations are able to resolve the neoliberal impact, and it would mean that it's better for the poor because they have to do things like join the army and the status quo in order to make money. They're able to alleviate all systems of structural poverty. Then obviously there would be no reverse incentive to sell things. We obviously say that there's a unique position for every person that is in the hospital, which is why they should get that choice. We shouldn't say that they're all the same, which is exactly the rhetoric that they are using. We don't know that they are unable to make up for some form of suffering that are extreme, which is the reason that it's necessary to have fear at some time in order can prevent the most dire consequences, like saying that if I don't eat anything, I'm probably going to be hungry, I'm going to feel terrible, which is a use of what it is. Okay, now death and suffering can be worse, which means that we should give them the choice, not say that they must do it. We don't say there's existential risk. Rather, we say that it is absurd for us to say that these people do not get choices because we know more than them and we are smarter than them, which is exactly the type of dehumanization that they push onto the radical other. Now, we aren't saying that the subject position is opposed to death, but that some subjects are hurt by the relationship that they are having to death and the status quo, which is why they should get a choice to change their birth rate. Evidence just indicates that death is part of life, not that living with dialysis is something that is very enjoyable. Also, we aren't saying that we would make people live forever. We just say that they could alleviate some of the worst forms of suffering. The Patterson evidence indicates that we must give people the opportunity to avoid death because anything else says that we erase their subjectivity and they are irrelevant. Saying that they have no value to life, so they can die is the exact opposite that Hitler used to say that killing the Jews was irrelevant in the first place. Clearly, we think that we should give people the choice of life, but we never say that everyone's going to live forever or have no suffering. That would be sort of demanding action is necessary, and which is the reason that the alternative is able to fail because they can't change the other overall systems of commodification that exist in the status quo, which means they leave the people on the list in a worse position so that they will die. That means you should do the plan plus have a form of exhaustion, which doesn't sever any of it because they still have a conception of the outside. There is no root cause. They can see there are conflicts of factors which cause every action and inaction to happen, which is the reason that you have to look at them and look at the specificity of the plan in the context. The fact that we should just do nothing allows the elites to take over, which is what makes their impacts inevitable in the first place. Life is the ability for choice, which is the reason that you need to have it in order to have value. Anything else says that some people are irrelevant and should be destroyed. The choice is the only way to have that, and any other assumption is fascist in and of itself because it says that we should have a dictator who is able to choose what does and doesn't happen, which is the position they're taking within the scholarly position. Lastly, Shepard used evidence doesn't assume because it assumes a right to buy or right to buy, where we say there's a right to sell.
I think it was 307.
Yeah, I agree. Sure. Sure. No, I don't disagree.
Counterplan framing. Alrighty. Everyone all set? The counterplan we're not going for permutation is a test competition. Their only risk launching on the counterplan demonstrates our link to utilitarianism. I'll explain that more later. Framing arguments will concede preemption is no offense. Their critique, they have conceded the reverse utilitarianism argument. Life is a continued process of mortification and continued suffering. It is constituted by the temporary illusion of happiness only in order to result in further forms of nihilism and eventual sadness. This is a conceded piece of the Gaudiums, which they're aware of the one in R is extremely long, which they will attempt to impact her in the one in the 2 AR, but they do not have any evidence on this question, which means that we should win this weight automatically. You should revert this skills. Vote negative if we result in more death in this particular baby. That exhaustion, that is what exhaustion is. It's passivity in the face of inevitable danger. The funny thing is that he actually does most of the ethical work here for me. He says that we should be able to alleviate pain. Or if we win the argument that life is constituted in relation to pain, and that life cannot exist, and that pain cannot exist absent life, which is the only piece of evidence on this round on, then that means you vote negative automatically. There are to answer this, so that you should give people a choice of life versus death. They have conceded there is no choice. Prolongation is an epistemological life prolongation is an epistemological basis, which is never a choice. It's always forced upon you, which is the arguments about seduction and symbolic exchange, which demonstrates that we win. Now, existence is only valuable when we decide what we are willing to risk itself for. That's why gambling, war, love, are universal facets of human experience. They're radical, dangerous, or leap to pain. Their distinction scenarios are leaving imprints, probability magnitude or nonsense, because the probability that every person has died will die is 1-to-1. Death lies in every direction. Whence for precedent returns with unimaginable violence. On 9/11, we were pointing missiles to North Korea. We were struck by our own planes. We always find death. That's a conceived piece of McGowan, which is the reason why death is inevitable, which is why you should always try to impose more, because their attempt to flee from death is something that destroys the worst forms of life, destroys the constituency, the reason why life would actually even be possible value in the first place, which is our argument how they have done so. They provide the conditions for nihilism within this particular debate, which is our life reservation. Now, death is they are an attempt to stave off death. They will try to muddle this part of multiple parts of the once he demonstrates that the justification once he's not based on solving extreme suffering, but by rather prolonging life. They become the calculators who view lives as mere numbers, focus all their value arguments. They first piece of beer demonstrate it says the absent of the offspring, death will only increase in numeracy as well as in numerical quantity as well as in sort of like reason why it's bad. This is my argument about how that argument just assumes that there's slippery slope. You can't allow any death in the political sphere. Otherwise we're just going to be overwhelmed by that. Now the framework arguments, we don't have it all. We're not the alternative is essentially passivity. It's a relationship to status quo. We obviously we can permute the frameworks. That makes most of sense. The alternative doesn't have to be an action. They've conceded the only piece of evidence that I read on this, the only piece of evidence that's actually relevant, especially they've conceded the piece of Snow Government indicates a continuous strive for action. The ones he ascribed throughout the entire debate, something that is the conditions of possibility for response. It's funny that he calls us Nazis later, because only our evidence actually does a relationship in terms of Eichmann. Only our evidence draws a relationship in terms of Eichmann. Says that his power, says that his ability to cause mass violence was not based on his failure to act, rather his failure to refuse action is a form of nihilism, a response by which provides conditions possibility for lash out as well as violence, which is a sort of conceded argument in relation. Now the Antonio Evans, his only answer to the arguments to our argument about simulation role playing is that they need to engage the government in order to access policy education. They've conceded that their attempt to influence politics outside of the self is a form of response, but an overstretching the will results in pure political nihilism, because you are in it because you recognize you're incapable of doing anything, and and then you just hate yourself, which is a reason why the sort of ascription to action is something that instantiates response, specifically within this space, because we have no capacity to influence the outside world. So when you try to do so, you will recognize that we will recognize with your mouth that you have failed. That instills a form of response, which is left, and I have no answer to that argument, and it's a critique of role playing. They have no reason why role playing or policy simulation, whatever they did, the YC was good, which means that we have an impact turn to this argument, which means you can just vote on that argument there. Let's see, permutation. Then we have multiple impact turns to permutation. Permutation doesn't make sense. We are an inscription of death right onto our minds. Or Rosinski indicates that we need to recognize that life is filled with intensity. Life is always inscribed with elements of death. Our point is that the one sees an attempt to stave off death. All of our link arguments about how the one sees is an attempt to justify itself by saying that death is bad is a reason why they can't incorporate it into the alternative, because the alternative is an acceptance of death, letting death rush over us in the status quo.
Also, the permutation doesn't make any sense. They can see it are a piece of love. Butterfield evidence indicates that their understanding of biological death is completely incompatible with the alternative because it only further plays into the regime of equivalence. Sarah, what else do I have to answer? They say new root cause. They don't have a piece of evidence on the question specific to regimes of equivalence and death. They can see the piece of Robinson evidence in the 1 and C, which says that the original constitutive outside of modernity was death, which provides conditions possible for all other exclusions because it views certain lives as not being productive. That's how things like ableist violence, heteronormative violence happen, because those bodies are deemed to be outside the norm. That's an external impact which they don't really have an answer to. Yeah. They say the elites will take over if we don't do anything. Our point is that the elites have already taken over. They impose regimes of life preservation. These sorts of systems of exchange already exist. We're not going for the vast majority of the arguments about capitalism per se, but we are going for our life preservation arguments. Means that this doesn't actually have an impact to it. I don't know what elite takeover means. Our point is that the elites already exist. They want to enforce the existence of elites through their understanding of actionability, which is the Stoic evidence as well as the Antonio evidence. The voting neg is murder argument. They can see that's a dangerous form of intellectual political coercion. That's the foundation for the link argument, the idea that death is so dangerous that if you even are in any sense opposed to continuous life preservation, then you're automatically Hitler, demonstrates that they're the actual politics of purity fascism, which we all are evidence in.
Everybody ready? The most important concession in the 2 hours is the people who are on the waiting list dying because they don't have organs aren't just dying. They are sitting around listening to the dialysis strip, living a life where they're unable to interact with their families because they have to be constantly on medical support. They don't have the ability to live life in the way they enjoy. There are also people who are being trafficked, having their organs literally ripped out of their bodies. They've not gone through an impact in the 2 hours besides, quote, violence and the fact that there are bad things that happen, that suffering happens. There is not a reason why the act is necessarily an orientation towards getting rid of death, but a reason why it says that people should not have to sit around and suffer all the time because there are degrees of suffering them, and some of them are worse than others, and the act is the way of preventing the worst ones. There is a net benefit to doing the affirmative because even if it is true that orienting ourselves towards death doesn't do anything, that death is not real, people sitting around and not being able to enjoy their life certainly has some meaning, even if it is true that life will inevitably be bad because we can create gradients in how good or bad life is. This is a conceded argument of the 2 hour, which means that they can win their argument that death does not matter and does not rule, but that does not mean that the way people are dying is good. This is a framing issue because how people die matters. Even if it is true that people dying is not a good thing, they remove the ability for people to have a choice about what happens while they're alive. That removes agency and sentences a certain portion of the population to living a life that is painful and lacking in meaning because they don't have the ability to make choices about what happens for them. They have no choice but to get their organs ripped out, to sit and listen to the dialysis strip, which means that even if it is true that they let people die, they don't create more death, which means they don't resolve anything for these people. The alternative explanation at the 2 hours, you can vote neg if we produce more death. They don't produce death, they produce people who sit around listening to their dialysis strip, which is not enough to resolve the impact. And yes, life is painful, but we can make it less painful by resolving that immediate form of suffering for some people, which means even if we resolve death, that is a reason to vote out. Now, the second reason you should vote negative because the alternative does not say that death is bad. It says that we should allow death to happen for some people and not for others. This is not necessarily fascism, but rather the removal of choice for a portion of the population is from a position of privilege that we stand in the room and say that we debaters at Baylor and Emory should feel comfortable orienting ourselves towards death in a way that it never affects them. However, for people on the waiting list, that is not an option. Even if that is the permutation resolve this because if it changes their ethics, then those people would always choose to simply not engage in the organ system and live the way the alternative relies. If that is not true, then there's not an impact to the alternative at all because people would simply scapegoat and inevitably go to the black market, which they conceded they don't solve, which means that the impact is people prioritizing life in the black market, which exists in the status quo, will perpetuate that, and the only impact they've gone for, which is quote lash out, would still happen no matter what. So you should default to just improving the quality of people. That they say there is a choice that is always forced. That doesn't mean that the material conditions in which people make that choice are always forced. Yes, it is true that at some point people die and that there are factors that contribute to that. However, they have conceded that the affirmative removes people from the waiting list, and that is a choice that materially affects some sort of suffering when they're alive, even if the inevitable result is that is some suffering later on. But that choice is important. The McGowan argument that death is inevitable and fleeing from it is bad only says that is because we think that death exists. This is where I will address the link debate. The only link he has extended is the link to the pure evidence because we said death will exist. The acknowledgement that death is real does not mean that the one he sees is an orientation towards the idea that all we must do is prevent death. It rather says that there are people who live in a lot of pain and die now, and it is probably up to them whether they want to do that. That is not the ultimate orientation and evasion of death. However, an argument that people should be able to choose that for themselves, and the all precludes that the alternative doesn't take action. Now, there's a couple of problems with this argument. The first is that we have read in evidence that says that yes, us orienting ourselves ethically towards preventing death does create some political change, which means that they are wrong about the idea that it creates resentment and resentment and lash out because we can do something. The Wexler evidence describes how that is empowering and changes personal ethical orientations to the way we create action, which allows us to create political and other forms of movements, which allow us to engage in larger structures. It is not impossible to alter those because since individuals are organ donors, obviously we are the people who choose whether people get organs or not. If people orienting themselves to organ policy differently, then regardless of what the government does, that changes things like the rates of people who donate. And what would happen if we, for example, ended up on the organ list? That individual orientation does not lead to a resentment, and there's also no warranted reason why that would lead to lash out as individuals. That simply allows us to think that maybe we should save other people's lives if they're sitting around suffering and not enjoying it. But also the fact that if they win, that death is not an impact, means there's not an impact to lash out, and you should just default to the mere possibility that maybe some people's suffering is bad and the affirmative does something about it. They say that politics outside of the self is bad, or that I guess it's about we can do things even if we can't do things on a macro political level, because obviously we are debaters and not the government. The modeling of that idea is empowering and also acknowledges that there is an interplay between us and what happens in the government, and failing to acknowledge that least of the sort of resentment that they say we should be nihilistic about. That is what the permutation is the best option because we should create a space of availability for choice that allows people to dictate how they cultivate relationships towards life and death. The affirmative doesn't say everyone must live, but says that we should give individuals the choice to determine their own path. This is the best way death because it allows the individual to go through their own disclosure with the alternative. Now, this is a double edged. A, the alternative cannot change the way people think about striving towards life, or B, if the alternative does anything and changes the way that people go about their life, then they would not engage in the organ trade, it would not buy or sell their organ. This means there is not an impact to the critique, or at least an impact to their links, which means if the alternative works, then it means that people simply would not engage in that system because they realize it is unethical and lacking in value for them to do so. So there's not an impact to the link in the alternative, and the permutation resolves the rest of the links that go for about things like the anthropy and other reasons why people would be oriented towards suffering. This is important because they've conceded this argument of the one AR. If the alternative is functionally capable of resolving our ethical orientation, then there's no way why the reason that should be true or different for, or no reason why that wouldn't be true for people on the waiting list, which means that they wouldn't change their orientation. If that is not true, then the alternative is simply us standing here talking about death and allowing people to die, which is an ethic that should not be permitted because it prevents choice from being allowed. It means that people die. The alt is murder argument as a link. Yeah.
I like this purple pants. Color that I haven't thought of. That I should invest in. Do want to match whatever I have there.
Curtis.
Yeah. Is anybody here on the you opposed? I don't want to do it Thursday. That is what I usually start with the assumption that nobody else's opinions don't matter. It's a life lesson that has hurt me in many ways.
You just got that on video, you realize, Curtis.
Oh shit.
Maybe you were opposed to streaming the decision.
This is why I turned the comments off.
I already know that like Jaden and Vikram are watching. Shout out to them.
Hey, Jaden and Vikram, your opinions don't matter. I'm just kidding. They matter to some.
All of this recorded for posterity.
You like that job? Getting
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
No one has ever uploaded untrue.
Jimmy Jones is pretty good, just not.
I think there has to be this point in everyone's life where you're doing stuff and people like, what am I doing?
Yes.
Like,
And then the answer to that question becomes eating Jimmy John's and enjoying
I
myself.
just think it's like, it's literally bread just cooking.
That is useless. In this instance, it was good.
It
was bread. It was bread and meat.
They're even though
Their vegetarian option is bread with cheese.
I would say I'm a vegetarian. So
Just cheese.
Oh, okay. Well, in that instance, that makes sense.
Did you get the wrapper?
I haven't eaten yet. The idea of eating lunch at 10 o'clock is really working for me.
You should. Yeah, you won't have time. Like if you look at the schedule, it makes no sense. The schedule,
Well, it's like 10 o'clock and Max like, it's like it's lunchtime.
that's
but I-
scheduled comment. You can use it as leverage.
If that's not the only thing I can use for Curtis with
Are these comments currently restricted with them?
If you use this, what you should do is blur my face and like
Tune your voice.
yeah,
Like 10 octaves.
Make you sound like that.
So Ken said?
No, higher. Never.
Legn's nickname for me within our narrative schedule, which he writes stories about us, is Curtis. I can sleep through the apocalypse. Right? I went to
Never feel
Shoot, you're still on the team and you didn't show up.
I showed up just like at 2 o'clock.
That's not.
That's
What?
Well, I showed up at 9. I just was not at it. I was sent back to work. Which is why I woke up at 5 this morning and made everyone coffee.
That's an expectation you didn't show up. Or even if you did show up.
No, coffee needs something. Rush.
Or a brush. Well, you've been demoted.
Yeah, no.
You're lucky that the penalty boxes that have sent out the turn. Yep.
So happy. Y.
Fair enough.
Or is there like a copy duty on the LinkedIn? There's like a copy duty on the LinkedIn.
But I realize that's gonna be a video now. My voice is
I'm pretty sure you just referred to Charles as that shit.
I made sure of this. I like checked the audio. I not on
I don't know, man.
I actually backtracked on the video. Just turn on the audio right now.
was a little bit frustrating, and I actually ended up including the opposite direction that I originally thought when I was voting in. I ended up voting negative for criticism. I do think that it's very close to the few basic issues that I think are going on. One is I do think that the affirmative largely from the 1AC begins with a major framing in terms of avoidance of essentially death, people that are on waiting lists, potential death that's going to be associated with that. And I think going more towards the 2AR, there's a bit of a shift within the affirmative more towards, say, the violence, or at least not the violence, but the pain and suffering that's associated with being on that wait list. And I do think that that is the place in which you should move in that direction. But I do think that argument seems to be more developed, let's say, in the R, and then even more developed going into the 2AR. Evidentiary speaking, in terms of the ethics or the ways that we should deal with pain and suffering, especially body-based suffering and things like that, for people that are waiting on the wait list, I don't think you have a lot of support beyond what I feel compelled to vote for this suffering. It sucks to be on the waiting list. It sucks to be on dialysis, and I want to vote for that. But I do think, a few things that kind of save the negative is this 1R piece of evidence that's being read that's just about life is kind of in a sense, pain and suffering that's being associated with it. We're constantly just trying to drag ourselves away from suffering. It becomes somewhat problematic. I don't think that evidence is too bad, and I think it does kind of correlate with a few of their other arguments of the ways that impacts like value life-based issues, not really a term used by the negative. I think it's implicit within some of the cards, as well as essentially like the meaning of life, some of the effects that we take with it. And so for me, I think that against this criticism, for one, you need more just basic offensive sucks to die and avoidance of death, and references of evidence that is being read in the 1AC about avoidance of death is a good thing. It's an ethical decision that a judge should be able to make, and it's good. But I also think that, within the context of their death avoidance-based arguments, and I do think you're attempting to make some of these distinguishing claims. There's a difference between, say, death that's associated with war, maybe in conflict, and death that's caused unnecessarily that could be avoided in terms of, say, a youthful person needing, say, an organ and then surviving. And I think that you need to drag some of those core distinctions further into 2AC arguments, that if we have a 25-year-old that's lost the functioning of their kidney, for example, and the idea that we should just sit back and say, do not, protect the life and prevent suffering in the context of that should be enough to motivate action to be able to vote for you all. But I don't think that you frame it in that way. In this, to a certain extent, you do kind of link to some of the arguments that the 2R is going for about this equivalence. Anybody that needs an organ is essentially the same. What's the distinction between a 70-year-old who needs an organ versus, say, a 25-year-old? I don't think you're drawing out a lot of those basic arguments as a justification for types of people that are on the waiting list and people that actually meet the requirements of being on the waiting list. And I think that needs to be developed a lot further. And so even when you're kind of discussing this, I think, what was it? Might have been in cross-examination that I pointed this out. I wrote down some comments. So I wrote down the portion of a cross-examination when you start defending the regulations of the market in ways that it keeps people that are included to make sure that, say, people are not exploited or commodified or whatever, as well as potentially the people that should receive organs, I think should be more contained within the 1AC to be able to build an offense against this criticism, right? And so in that instance, if their criticism sounds like we are going to do literally anything and everything to be able to stave off it. But I don't think that that's the way that the purchasing of organs would actually go down. If you're a 75-year-old that's having heart failure and kidney failure, likelihood you're not going to be qualified in order to get an organ transplant versus somebody that's 25, 30 years old.
Do you think, maybe not in this debate, I think like sometimes we avoid that framing because to like posit it that way, it's like, we'll prioritize certain people over others, like sort of a.
So I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah.
Just to a certain extent, the do nothing alternative, and especially in combination with some of the Nietzsche-based arguments, it seems like you can easily flip that in the opposite direction with prioritization of the self in order to avoid fascism by social good. And you just need to defend kind of that social good. And one of the reasons why this is frustrating is that I do think that suffering dialysis argument is a good reason for affirmative. I think on both sides this is kind of happening. A lot more evidence being read on the negative side of things, but not potentially a lot of reference to say affirmative evidence. Affirmative is referencing arguments, but not really doing a great job at undermining the quality of some of the evidence that's being read by the negative, as well as referencing cards and evidence that supports your claims. I think this Wexler card is fairly terrible. It's just like, hey, we can do stuff, and that'd be good, right? We can improve the world. I think that you can find some better evidence to be able to back your affirmative and what to do. And that was, a lot of your arguments that are being made here are kind of attempting to make logical inconsistencies that are occurring with the affirmative and justifying the permutation. But in reading their evidence, I think that the cards are really good in terms of always avoiding suffering as a bad thing, always trying to prolong life as being a bad thing, and it does include some issues in terms of in the face of attempting to prolong life, that you can do nothing in front of that, and it could be a way in which we can prevent an Eichmann-esque type situation. I don't typically find those arguments to be too persuasive. I think if I vote affirmative that you lead to being an Eichmann, but I think there's a risk associated based within the ethics-based arguments that I think the negative is going for. So permutation-wise, I'm not sure. I kind of agree with the 2R in the framing. It's like how can these two be associated with one, essentially literally doing nothing in the face of kind of suffering versus all of your justifications for doing the permutation are in the exact opposition to what the alternative actually does. And so I do think that more no-link-based arguments, as well as a justification based on avoidance of certain types of death and not being responsible for the death avoidance arguments that the A is making, which I do think you make some loosely defensive arguments. I'm not saying that you're not. But again, so that's why when I go into this decision, I'm like, yes, suffering bad, being on dialysis is horrible. If I vote affirmative in the permutation, somewhat resolve some of those issues, that's good. I can vote aft. But again, I think that suffering-based argument not really defended well within the ethics arguments, evidence being read about it, as well as an actual scenario for that suffering outside of you just kind of referencing it in one argument and referencing.
What do you mean, like, what's a better way to create a scenario? Because I think maybe this is just a problem.
So I in this instance I agree that the 1AC is largely dedicated towards death.
Yeah, sure.
I think the 1AC should include essentially an advantage that's based on how shitty it is to live waiting for work.
What do you think about the Taylor stuff that's black market independently is the reason it's bad because it creates exploitation and suffering via people having their bodies removed by the.
Yeah, that's horrible. Yeah, and I agree. But I mean, one of the reasons why I think I paused with that for a second is a disadvantage against the alternative. One of the reasons why people are motivated to go out and essentially do horrible atrocities to be able to prolong life is essentially to save life. Yeah, is to go into the life.
Sure, but when they also do nothing, let the school happen. I don't understand that.
It's more of a do nothing in reference to arguments and motivation to be able to prevent death.
Those individuals do nothing with the residual things they have. Right? It seems like either their argument has to be the people who are getting the organs should do nothing, in which case it doesn't really seem to matter if organs are legal or not because they just want to buy them. Or if it's not about those individuals, that they would continue the black market.
Yeah, I think it's also targeted. The framing of people making that decision, oh my God, I'm going to die, this is really scary, is based within a subjectivity that says death is something that is ultimately needing to be avoided.
If that is true.
But this alternative doesn't solve spillover-based argument. It needs to also be referenced in both evidence as well as more of how does the ballot operate in the context of the alternative versus how it exists within social and political-based issues. I mean, that's not a discussion that's happening during this particular argument because you focus much more time on just the permutation operating well, but less of the alternative obviously. So that's hard to evaluate without. But yeah, I mean, so the reason why I'm frustrated with this is that, I think I agree with the 2AR that I think the 2R's discussion of the implications of the critique is fairly limited. And I do think that contained within their evidence, there are 4 different locations of the again, it's like, well, but does the affirmative kind of justify much of what they're doing? Do they have death bad, death avoidance good arguments? No, you only really go for suffering bad. But again, because that isn't a major focus of the affirmative, I have very little to hang my hat on in terms of here's reasons why voting for suffering is good. And that's why I said I think that one in our card that's towards the top is being read is kind of their saving grace in this instance. And this is the frustrating point that I have in the debate. I think the one are, both of you are really good at talking about your kind of arguing for your stance, but failing at referencing actual pieces of evidence from the negative and showing why it really doesn't have kind of the blanket coverage that this evidence possibly could do. So speaker point wise, as well as yeah, I think so.
The one that's just like people are dumb and are like always gonna be.
Yeah, I mean that tag is terrible, but it's just more they just suffering's kind of happening, and it's just occurring.
So
I like, is that not a reason to like the equally in this argument? It's just like you suffer net more in the fashion that you have our own dialysis strip, at least according to the annual black card we're reading.
yeah, because I think like the way we'd like to that feature explain this in the 2AR.
Yeah, net more base suffering framing issues, especially at the very top, and describing how that sliding scale occurs and what that means. Right? I don't feel like I was compelled in this round to go out and this is the evidence that wins the debate round, and then saying that sliding scale occurs, and there's a clear distinction between. Because here's I've known just to disclose some of my perspective on this, and I've known people that have been on dialysis, and it's a constantly pain and suffering and horrible life. Well, it's a life, it's happening. They find ways of living around it, but it isn't pure suffering. It's a little bit unfair. So your description of that needs to be better developed. Sure. To say yes, it's freaking awful. You're exhausted after dialysis. You can't do it.
What do you think is like the check thing with 2AR that 2AR needs to maybe answer better, more like maybe the lawyers like some what we talk about with suffering?
So that's why when I'm like suffering, hang your hat on, and if you have better explanations of how that's happening, make it quite clear as an independent reason beyond just the death portion of it. I think it's fascist. It leads to violence, justifies any countermeasure to death, or an entire medical system that is just dedicated to life prolonging.
Fascism then.
Well,
like, yeah, because my interpretation.
No, I don't think it's necessarily.
So like, what is?
I think it's more I think the evidence from the one NC is fairly good in reference to how we as ourselves find value in our lives as subjects and our positioning within it, and that within the context of death avoidance, it means our entire lives are reoriented around essentially being productive members of society, and that just undermines some potentiality. Is that a great impact? I think again, Tunar could be doing a much better job on this. But in 2AR reference to the issue that I want to vote for, better to hang my hat on, and easier to vote for the failure of the Tunar in that instance would easily make it easier. So I agree. I don't think Tunar is great on it. I do think that reading the evidence that they're extending and referencing helps them. Yeah, so in terms of the negative side of things, outside of just some basic ethics of discourse of death and stuff, you all are fairly terrible going into the tail end of the debate in reference to just the organ sales being problematic quantification. You go in and you donate one of your organs, and then you have complications 5 to 10 years later, or maybe even immediately after the donation, and financial stress that happens around it, and everything else, that you just don't really have much of an impact that's associated with that process, which I think is problematic. The further you move away from the organ discussion and the plan of what the affirmative does, it makes it much easier for them to just focus very much tailored and narrow it down to what the affirmative does. Now, the other problem that I have coming into this is because, like, when I hear the 1AR, start talking about just that essentially violence of existence rather than just death, until there's a moment in which you're like, nah, the app is really about death, and you kind of respond to that a little bit. I mean, that's not even a closed door that they slam shut. It's like you're not really predicting this is going to be the strongest argument to it can be making. And I think the 1AC pieces of evidence that you're reading about organ sales become less important versus more of your just discourse and death-based arguments. And so that, I mean, that's why I think this debate is close on both sides, because, well, I think the 2R is loaded up on the evidence side of things. The strongest arguments that you have against the affirmative beyond your entire 1AC is largely framed around the avoidance of death-based argument. It's also just the plan implications. I mean, that's where you should be getting a lot of your arguments. I think this neoliberalism-based argument, the K originally was being framed around, no longer became something that was essentially about the criticism going into the alternative. I had some questions about how the alternative would be able to resolve some of the issues. Is this a neoliberalism alternative? This is something that's dealing with just basically the death-based questions. I think those are problems that are occurring within this round as well that aren't exactly fair either. After, I do think the 1AC shell and the evidence is being read is good. I do think that the 2NC does a great job of extending the basic link-based arguments. I just think the 2R is getting a lot weaker on that. It's spending far too much time re-explaining issues of death politics bad, and be very happy about your alternative. You also don't do a great job in terms of what can the judge do, theoretically speaking, with the permutation, and how that operates outside of, if I just conclude that it logically doesn't make sense, then you're in a good position. If I conclude that it logically can occur, then the affirmative is in a much better position, I think. So, very close to me.
Do you think that there's more packaging that I can do in certain parts of the debate to make it, or do you think that the real problem with it is that it's just the fact that you're going for more of the reps discourse strategy?
Reps and discourse are bad. I mean, that's all of this is going to be reps and discourse.
Yeah.
I think your problem is that the patient and those people that are involved in the organ donation process are entirely absent from the argument.
So even if we're just going for like the 1AC death impact, like the fact that we didn't talk about like what that means.
I mean, like the Foucault kind of placing society at risk in order to defend society is kind of what we're going for to a certain extent. Avoiding death at the risk of actually destroying society or causing people to go through violence. That's fine, but why can't you get down to the level of what that means for those people that like here for $2,500 to give people that beyond just even the terms exploitation, but just what that means for those lived experiences contained within the affirmative discourse is something that I think you're inadequate on. And so if they're doing a better job of being like, we have a little bit of a niche area in which death avoidance is good, as well as suffering it can be avoided, and it's a good thing both for us. And they're much better at making that niche something that can be at least defended around the rest of the K arguments. Your generic-based extensions is problematic. Very bad place. And that confuses me because I think, especially this portion of the topic, is a very good area in which you can really go through and talk about the potential implications of this. And there's lots of great literature on how it can result in a lot of a lack of happiness or joy, right? It's not like people walk away with a few words and feel happy about it. What is that author that you read? I didn't want to see what that person was talking about. No, this is Joe, the heart transplant, the French philosopher. You ever heard of him?
The Nancy stuff?
Yeah.
The sharp stuff?
No, I think it was Nancy.
Nancy's like the second.
Yeah,
Like the anthropology.
But Nancy was the person that got the heart transplant.
You're thinking about
Some of the Nancy-based literature that we were reading early in the topic, there was an interesting discussion where he had an organ transplant. He was referencing how freaky it was. This thing like opened himself up and was placed within him. Felt very alienated by the whole medical process that was associated with it.
It's a sharp book called Harvesting Organs or something like that. Strange Harvest, I think. It talks about it.
But anyway, so that process of going through medicalization of the transference of organs, and the idea that somebody potentially died because of it, or somebody has to sacrifice a portion of themselves. So better explanation of them, and you're also part of this essential to be able to make this into more sustainable. something to develop as you move forward with these types of things.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the